Good afternoon. Welcome to Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee for our hearings this March 4th, 2021. Apologize for us pushing back the starting time. We were on the floor till fairly late, so thank you for your patience. We have again 11 or 12 or 13 bills today. The rules of the road are that the sponsor will introduce the bill. They'll be followed by their lead proponent, who will have up to 5 minutes. Subsequent speakers will have up to 2.5 minutes. We'll take questions after the favorable and the favorable with amendments. Then we'll go to the opposition and take questions from them. And I will tell you if there is no opposition signed up. If you need to read from a presentation to give you structure, please feel comfortable doing that. But I think the committee also greatly appreciates speaking to us, sharing your thoughts in as real a way as possible. This first bill is 701. It is Senator West. It is on the county authority to incur indebtedness. I do not see anybody signed up orally or written unfavorable. There are one or two with amendments. Senator West will be followed by Matthew Geckel, followed by Emily Ranson, Edward Harrison, and William Palin. With that being said, welcome back to EHE, Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here to present Senate Bill 701. I note at the beginning that there is an amendment that I believe we have included in your packets that has been vetted and approved by the sponsor as well as myself. And this deals with the Bay Restoration Fund, which was established in 2004 and currently has about $115 million on hand. The Department of the Environment administers the fund. $15 million a year is allocated in grant funding, largely in the form of block grants to county health departments. The counties can reliably expect to receive these monies annually, and they in turn use them to make loans or grants to county residents whose septic systems have failed. Maryland has about 500,000 septic systems serving residents, and about 10% of these are in poor or failing condition. A home septic system is the most expensive system in a home, and all home septic systems eventually fail. When that happens, the system must be replaced, or else raw sewage is emitted and ends up in local watercourses. The cost of replacing a septic system can run as high as $75,000. The block grants to the counties from the Bay Restoration Fund are intended to help county residents pay for the cost of septic system replacement. Generally speaking, counties have enough money each year to assist their citizens with their septic system replacement costs. However, there are occasions when available money runs out. In such situations, it's unacceptable for failing septic systems to be left unattended until the next year's block grant from the Bay Restoration Fund comes. Senate Bill 701 authorizes the counties to capitalize the future stream of money coming to them from the Bay Restoration Fund. It authorizes them to borrow money now on the strength of future receipts from the fund. In order to do this, a county is authorized to issue notes to lenders. The principal of the notes may be repaid from the county's Bay Restoration Fund allocation. The bill also authorizes the county to pledge its full faith and credit to the payment of the principal and interest on the notes, and then it must dedicate property tax revenues in future years to pay the principal and interest. Essentially, under Senate Bill 701, the counties are given an additional tool in their toolboxes to deal with failing septic systems. They can borrow today against future allocations of Bay Restoration Fund money, and thus can fund current urgent septic system repairs. I hope that you'll give Senate Bill 701 a favorable report, and I turn the proceedings over to my two witnesses.
Thank you, Senator West. Matt Geckel, please, Back River Precast.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members, for hearing this bill. SB 701 will help homeowners dramatically in being able to have access to funds to pay for their failing septic system. It is not uncommon in today's world for someone to face a $40,000 repair bill on their septic system. Given that almost no homeowner is prepared to fork out $40,000 to make a repair on their home that is an essential part of their home. This bill would provide funding for these homeowners to get a loan, because some of them, they need to get the loan right away, and qualifying for the loan could take months that they don't have to get their system repaired. And they would also be able to, the counties would be able to collect this money back because it would go on their property taxes, just like you do a sewer connection fee. So the ability for the counties to recoup their money is very good. You know, there isn't a day that goes by that somebody doesn't call me up with a failing septic system, and then when they find out how much it's going to cost, they're like, I don't know where I'm going to get this money. And this would help them get the money. For that reason, I encourage a favorable report on SB 701. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Geckel. Ms. Ranson?
Hi, good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky, members of the committee. I'm Emily Ranson with Clean Water Action, here in support of Senate Bill 701. Over the years, you've heard us talk a lot about septic systems, and after hearing a bit about that financing, I want to really emphasize why this is so incredibly important. Septic systems are basically tiny wastewater treatment plants. They have a really important job, making sure that human waste from a home is getting treated so it's safe to release back into the environment. If a system fails, no one is winning. Not the homeowner, not their neighbors, not the groundwater, not the streams, not the bay. And systems may fail from no fault of that homeowner. Maybe it's because, as we have seen, increasing intensity of rainfall events. Maybe it's that the home would have never been approved under modern standards. Maybe the soils don't drain correctly. Maybe it's a really small lot. And whatever the reason is, the septic field repair or replacement, especially that drain field, can be incredibly expensive. And so at the end of the day, we want those systems fixed, and having this bonding authority is just another way for counties, if they want to offer this help to homeowners. And at the end of the day, we would really like to see more septic systems get fixed, more people having safe drinking water, operating wastewater treatment plants. So thank you, and we urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Ms. Ranson. Let's go to Edward Harrison.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Eddie Harrison, and testifying in support of SB 701. I'm an unpaid legislative liaison for the Maryland On-Site Wastewater Professional Association, or MALPA. I'm also a small business owner of BAT On-Site LLC, an automated on-site wastewater operation and maintenance provider. I've been involved in the on-site wastewater industry since 1984. The on-site wastewater system is the most expensive appliance in the home. All on-site wastewater systems eventually fail. The typical life expectancy is 20 to 30 years. This is why today's approved lots require the planner to provide room for 2 repairs on any new lot. After the system has served its useful life, the dispersal part of the system gets replaced for a reasonable price of $4,000 to $9,000. That's about 90% of the system. It's not really. This wouldn't be for the. This bill wouldn't apply to them. A significant number of homes built prior to 1960 would not be allowed to be built today due to the ground not meeting current perk testing practices. And some homes since that time would not be built. When the system fails on those lots, the repair can become much more challenging. MDE can get involved, and the system can fall under what is called innovative and alternative, or INA. These systems require engineering, pre-treatment, including BAT, an automated dispersal system, and cost the property owner anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 or more. There's not always equity in the home to cover the expenses of repair, and if the repair is not done, the property can't be sold, thus adding insult to injury. Some cases, the property ends up in foreclosure, abandoned, a blight in the community, and lowering property values. In many cases, the system just continues to fail and causes safety hazards to public health and the environment. MALPA supports any additional sources of revenue to allow property owners to repair the on-site system of these difficult sites. Thank you for your time, and please give SB 701 a favorable report to protect a Maryland homeowner's most valuable asset.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. And finally, William Palin from CBF, Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to the members of the committee. My name is William Palin. I'm a sophomore in Hereford High School in Northern Baltimore County, and I'm part of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm here to express my unequivocal support for Senate Bill 701. I want to focus more on what could happen to the Chesapeake Bay when raw sewage does spill into the water. The Chesapeake Bay is the nation's largest estuary and has been at the core of Maryland's culture and economy since the dawn of history. It is home to over 3,600 species that live in many different habitats, from the hardwood forests of the Appalachian Mountains to the saltwater marshes. For many years, human activity had little to no impact on the health of the bay. Unfortunately, by the 1960s, following the onset of the Industrial Revolution, it became apparent that the health of our bay had fallen on difficult times. Modern sewage systems have contributed to increased phosphorus and nitrogen levels from septic systems in the bay, which ultimately result in dead zones. These dead zones form when algae die and sink to the bottom, and then when they're decomposed, the bacteria strip the dissolved oxygen from the surrounding water, and crabs and fish can no longer live in that area. That's why, hence the name dead zone. Scientists at University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science have projected that the warming of the climate even contributes even more to increasingly larger dead zones. This bill would authorize the county to incur indebtedness as necessary for assisting their citizens with septic system repairs, and in doing so, make progress towards fixing this problem. In recent years, we have made plenty of progress towards mitigating the harmful anthropogenic effects on the bay. And while we should be optimistic, we should not be complacent. Thank you. And I urge this committee to give a favorable review to Senate Bill 701. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Mr. Palin. Senator Cruz has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Senate sponsor. This has been a persistent and extremely serious problem in my district, especially in Comico County, with the failing septics. My question, and I guess it would be for the bill sponsor, I did see that MACO wasn't supported this, and I guess my question to the bill sponsor is, how do you think we can make sure that this program is set up in a way, in the most efficient way possible to actually expedite to the counties? I think this is an outstanding way to approach these immediate problems. And I didn't know if you had conversations with MDE or MACO on how the best way to set this the program up.
To answer your question directly, not really, but as I went over the bill, it seems to be drafted in a very simple way. A county can simply go to a local bank and borrow $20,000 against their allocation for the next year, can disperse the money currently, and as soon as the allocation comes in, pay off the note. That's what this bill permits. So now it could be more complicated. If you wanted to borrow against your allocation for the next 5 years or next 10 years, things can get a little more complicated. But if there's an immediate need and next year's allocation is expected to come in 4 months, you can borrow money today, spend the money to fix the septic systems, and then when the money arrives 4 months from now, just pay the loan off.
We'll follow up with MDE as well.
Sure.
Senator West, quick question. if a jurisdiction forward funds and expends more than what they are to receive the next year or the year after, I know the bill says taxes shall be imposed if there's inadequate payment, and the county shall impose additional, I guess, property tax. I guess my question is, can a county automatically increase property tax, or does it take council action, or what happens if they have a property tax limit? I guess I just want to have all the protections that if they overspend what they're going to receive and the numbers are off kilter, whether we can count on repayment to the state.
Well, I think it's a good question, Mr. Chair. So there's a section of the bill, see if I can find the exact page and number. It's subsection
Page 3.
2. It's on page 3. Yeah. That talks about the ad valorem taxes. Is this page 3 or is it page 2? 3, the top of page 3. So I don't think I don't read the bill as requiring the county to increase the property taxes. And I certainly don't read it as overriding some say county constitutional provision passed by the voters in previous years in referendum, which would put a limit on property taxes. But I read it as saying the county must take money out of the property taxes in order to pay the principal and interest. And if it means the county has to stint on some other expenditure that would otherwise come out of the property taxes, then that's the solution to the problem.
Right, but Senator, if you look at line 7 through 9 on that very same page,
Yes, okay.
it shall impose additional taxes to make up the deficiency.
Yes, but that's if the property taxes, if the money generated by the property taxes aren't sufficient. Most counties that I'm aware of generate most of their operating revenues from property taxes.
Okay,
This would have to be a first bid from the property taxes to pay this. And that might mean they have to reduce other expenditures coming out of the property taxes.
got it.
It
Thank
would
you.
only be if they used up all their property taxes and they still weren't able to pay the principal and interest on these loans that they would then have to impose new taxes.
Okay,
That's the way I read the bill.
I appreciate it. Seeing no further questions. Madam Vice Chair, do you have a question? No, okay. That completes the hearing. Senator West, thank you to the witnesses.
Thank you. And I want to compliment Mr. Palin. It's great when a junior in high school can deliver compelling testimony like that. Congratulations to you.
Yes, thank both of you. Great job. We're going to move on to Senator Hester, 721, Procurement Small Business Reserve Program. The good senator introduces the bill. We'll go to Greg Holmes, Tricia Swanson, Laura Brown, and Allie Williams. The only unfavorable is written only, it is not oral. Senator FreyHester, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Katie FreyHester speaking on Senate Bill 721. Many of you may have seen something right after the beginning of the new year. Governor Hogan released an executive order that designated all state procurements between $50,000 and $500,000 for the Small Business Reserve Program, with just a few exceptions. And this was a really welcome move for our small business community. Senate Bill 727 builds on this executive order by codifying it into state law that all agencies' purchase of goods and services under $500,000 should be designated for the SBR program, unless the agencies seek and receive exemptions for certain contracts from the coordinating office, which is the Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs. In working with the bill sponsor in the House, Delegate Chi, we talked about how to make this more than just a law on paper, but to give it some teeth. And what we really thought is that there was a need for some additional points. So in the bill, we also offered we wanted to give assistance to small businesses to help them understand how best to procure from the state of Maryland. So there's assistance for them in there. We also wanted to instruct the governor's office to do some work on unbundling contracts, because some of these contracts even ones that are, in the $100 to $500 $1,000 range, you can unbundle those at times to make it more accessible for Maryland small business. And then also to assist with procedures and marketing, so that the small businesses, particularly those that have been in business for less than 3 years, receive notice about this excellent government program. And so in short, the bill really just codifies and enhances the governor's executive order. And it makes, as a starting point, that the state of Maryland will purchase from these small businesses, which will help the small businesses, help the state, and help the overall economy of Maryland, which is especially important at this point in time. And with that, I will turn it over to my panel and encourage a favorable report on Senate Bill 771.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go to Michael Wilson. No, I'm sorry. My apology, Greg Holmes.
Good afternoon. This is Greg Holmes. I'm with Maryland Black Businesses Matter. We're an organization that launched in an effort to help elevate the voice of Black businesses in Maryland, as well as to help empower them to be more politically active and engaged. We're in full support of this bill, and I want to thank the chair and the committee, as well as Senator Hester, for the opportunity to testify in support. I'm going to talk real kind of specific about three particular pieces of the potential outcome of the bill. One, at the contract level that the senator mentioned, at $500,000 or below, it really gives small business an opportunity to become prime contractors. And as a lot of us know on the call, a lot of the minority of small businesses seem to sub a lot of the work, but at this dollar value, it gives them an opportunity to really become prime contractors, helps them build capacity and past performance. So as they grow, they're growing from the standpoint of being primes, not subs. The second point is it helps build parity. As Senator mentioned, you're talking about businesses that have been in existence from 0 to 3 years. Now you're competing against like-sized companies. And for a small business, that's very important because you have a win strategy, and you have to look at how much internal resources you put into pursuing a contract opportunity when it's open. Now, in more of a defined and targeted way, those small and minority businesses can really kind of focus their efforts in opportunities they really have a greater chance of winning. The third thing I like to say is this is also a job creator opportunity. Large businesses aren't really going to focus, in my estimation, on $50,000 to $500,000 opportunities. And if they did, they would embed that work with current staff. Well, when we're looking at businesses under 25, they're more likely to have to hire 1 or 2 people to facilitate the performance in the new work. And so those are the 3 real tenets we see that can really be a direct opportunity that comes from the passage of this bill. And the last thing I'd like to say is in the governor's executive order and code, he referenced code in the Maryland Code, Title 14, Section 3. There is actually a disparity study that was commissioned by the General Assembly in 2017 that speaks to the disenfranchisement of minority and women-owned businesses. And so that was in 2017. And here we are in 2021, still trying to better define and look at strategies to help grow minority businesses in the state of Maryland, when it was already proven so in a disparity study back in 2017. So with that, I ask for immediate passage and vote on this particular bill, and I thank the committee and Senator Hester for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Ms. Swanson.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tricia Swanson, and I am Vice President of Government Relations for the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, here in support of Senate Bill 721. Over the last year, the Montgomery County Chamber has been advocating at the local, state, and federal level on behalf of our members. And in advocating for our members, what we're hearing is essential to these businesses' survival is the permanency of many executive orders that have been implemented during the pandemic. As was mentioned, this bill builds upon the governor's January executive order and aims to increase small business participation in state procurement. The Chamber especially supports the need to include all small contracts, including those under $50,000, in the Small Business Reserve Program. This legislation acknowledges that small business participation in the state's procurements should be increased, and that purposes of Maryland's procurement law are to ensure fair and equitable treatment of all persons who deal with the procurement system. Maryland small businesses employ 1.2 million people and are the backbone and leading job creators in Maryland's economy. Any additional support for these small businesses to survive the public health emergency and continue to employ our neighbors and grow our economy is essential. So for those reasons, the Chamber supports Senate Bill 721, thanks Senator Hester for the introduction of this legislation, and urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Swanson. Can we go to Laura Brown, please? Ms. Brown?
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and the members of the committee. My name is Laura Brown, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Maryland Small Business Development Center Network. And I appear before you today to offer our support for SB 721. Last year, our Small Business Development Center provided one-on-one consulting services and group training to over 9,000 clients, helping them to raise more than $148 million in capital, supporting nearly 54,000 Maryland jobs, and even in the midst of the pandemic, assisting 267 entrepreneurs to start their own new companies. We also oversee the Maryland Procurement Technical Assistance Center, sometimes called the PTAC, which offers to its clients procurement-focused consulting, training, and federal and state and local government contracting opportunities. The enactment of SB 721 is crucial to all small businesses, but especially to the smaller government contractors. It would codify the governor's executive order to increase the small business participation in state procurement. It would create a 15% state small business procurement requirement, and it would allow more small businesses to pursue government contracts of less than $500,000. Every day, the Maryland Small Business Development Center sees that small business owners need help to compete successfully in the government contracting world, and the Small Business Reserve Program will provide that help. So we hope your committee will view this bill favorably. And thank you to the committee and to Senator Hester for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Let's go to Ali Williams, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. My name is Ali Williams, President and CEO of the Greater Bethesda Chamber of Commerce. Today, I'm here to testify in full and total support of SB 721. This bill would codify the governor's executive order to increase small business participation in state procurement. The bill eliminates the bottom $50,000 threshold so that any purchases or contracts up to $500,000 shall be designated for the Small Business Reserve Program. This bill is another way to help small businesses, and it asks the Small Business Reserve Program to provide technical training where needed and to collect data regarding the state's utilization of small business reserves. At a time when businesses are still struggling to survive through the global pandemic, which has had a major impact throughout our state, the Small Businesses Reserve Program, as defined in SB 721, will be a perfect way in which to grow our small businesses so they can survive and thrive. We want to thank Senator Hester and Delegate G for their sponsorship of this important legislation and ask members of this committee for a favorable vote. Thank you for your consideration of my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Questions for any of the panelists? We'll start with the Vice Chair, followed by Senator Carrozza.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A comment and then a question. First off, the comment. I just want to say that it's terrific to see Trish Swanson and Ali Williams, two of my homies here, Leadership Montgomery, and important community leaders. So great to have you. Thank you for joining us. And the question for the sponsor of the bill, Senator Hester. You know that this question is coming. Two things. One is, would this apply to Maryland's nonprofit organizations? If so, how or how not? And second, is this legislation born from the Small Business Caucus, the bipartisan Senate Small Business Caucus that you helped establish? Is that something that came up and is something you've heard about?
Thank you very much, Senator Kagan, Vice Chair, for the question. I think that, access to capital and procurement opportunities, were things that we talked about all year long. I'd like to thank you and Senator Carrozza also for your participation in that working group. I think, we had talked about this a little bit, and then I was actually surprised when I saw the governor's executive order. And so we just thought it was such a good idea. We should, extend it so that it becomes permanent. Your first question about the nonprofits, I should have done my homework. I am not sure, because this program already, exists. I think it would probably follow the existing guidelines, and I will look into that and get back to you with an answer.
If you would, that'd be great.
Yes, of
They
course.
obviously have huge needs as well, especially now. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Hester, for introducing this legislation. And especially I like to see the partnerships with the chambers of commerce as well. I just wanted to point out, and perhaps I'm just going to ask you, and we can work it offline. Just want to make sure there's not any unintended consequences in actually maybe negatively impacting some other businesses. There were two associations in the area of transportation that are opposed at this point. And I thought maybe offline we could look at the language and see if possibly we can address some of their concerns so that it wouldn't have a negative impact. While we're supporting certain small businesses, we wouldn't have a negative impact on other businesses.
Okay, yeah, no, I'd be totally happy to work offline, but just calling it what it is, this is specifically to support small businesses with 50 employees, or less. And I do think that if there's large businesses opposing it, they're worried about the playing field being leveled. So I'm happy to talk offline, but I think their opposition is probably a policy difference, not something we can change in the language.
So if I understand it, that conversation will continue offline.
Yes, happy to have the conversation.
Okay, further questions on Senator Hester's first bill? Seeing none, we will move to her second bill, and that is 723, Maryland Food System Resiliency Council. The good senator will present the bill. She'll be followed by Michael Wilson, Willie Lance, Ann Palmer, and Colby Ferguson. I don't see any opposition. There may be some favorable with amendments, but there's no opposition. Please, Senator. You're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, esteemed members of the committee, for your consideration of Senate Bill 723 to establish the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council. As with many of our pieces of legislation, it was born over a need that we saw during this pandemic. I personally, helped at many different food pantries and got to know the different players who were involved all along the supply chain in food delivery. And so this bill, aims to address both the kind of current emergency food insecurity issue, but also the larger imperative of building a just and sustainable food system. Just a few statistics for you. According to Feeding America, in 2018, Maryland had 667,000 people with food insecurity. And as of October, the projected number of food insecure people had increased by almost 30%, likely, of course, influenced by the pandemic. But based on that projection, that means that somewhere around 850,000 Marylanders do not know where their next meal is coming from. And so what Senate Bill 723 does is it tries to bring together all the great things that are already happening in Maryland so that we're coordinated by establishing a food system resiliency council to better coordinate across local, private, public, government, the whole thing, to bring it all together. The goal of the council, as I said, is to coordinate. It would also track and analyze data to create a food map of food insecurity across the state. It would also have a fundraising role, leveraging federal and private sector grants. There also, I think, is a part of the bill where it talks about advising the state on how best to allocate resources in this area and exploring the role of the potential of federal community eligibility provisions to ensure all students are fed in the state. My understanding is that there's some places where it happens and some places where it's not rolled out as fully. So we really want to maximize those federal dollars. In addition, the council would be charged with making some recommendations on eliminating any racial inequities in the food system, addressing food deserts, areas where there are little or no access to fresh, affordable, and nutritious foods, and also looking at the food waste that we generate, increasing recycling. So there would be a series of recommendations coming out of this food council. And in thinking about this, we were thinking that it's a 2-year council. We don't want this to go on forever. But in the first year, we really focus on the immediate crisis at hand. And the second year, we would shift to some of these longer term recommendations. And at that point, make a determination as to whether the food council should continue or not. So I feel strongly that by creating this food resiliency council, we can find equitable and collaborative long-term solutions to address food insecurity in the state of Maryland. And with that, I will ask for a favorable report of Senate Bill 723 and turn it over to my panel.
Okay, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Chair Kagan, my name is Michael J. Wilson. I am Director of Maryland Hunger Solutions. We are a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to end hunger and to improve the nutrition, health, and well-being of individuals, children, and families in Maryland. We work all across the state of Maryland. And so I have already submitted written testimony for your consideration, but I will summarize that and try to address some of the questions which I think are obvious here. One is the pandemic. Second is the regional operations that already exist. And third, some of the ways we should think about how this Resilience Council should work. So it would have been very helpful at the beginning of the pandemic to have had this Resiliency Council already existing, because we work in a food system that is complicated. And by food system, I don't just mean people who go to the grocery store and buy groceries, or people who go to the food bank and get food. I want to talk about the private sector, which is grocery stores and restaurants. I want to talk about the nonprofit sector, which is groups like ours. I want to talk about the charitable sector, which is food banks and pantries. I want to talk about the government sector, which includes the State Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health, the Department of Human Services, and the Department of Education. And I also want to talk about the agricultural sector and the entire chain that brings us our food. And so coordinating all of that in a food system is complicated, but can be done if we have a council that coordinates what's going on here. We have had the fortune at Maryland Hunger Solutions to work with many of these local operations. I currently chair the Montgomery County Food Council. I've worked with the Prince George's Food Equity Council. I've worked with Baltimore Food Pack. When Howard County had a food task force, we participated in that. And I know you're going to hear from Western Maryland here later, but Southern Maryland and other parts of the state have had councils. The problem with councils is that they are limited to working within their borders. And so there are so many cross-border operations, cross-border opportunities that exist that to only think about just this jurisdiction leaves us a little bit behind. People need to know that the Howard County Task Force created the Roving Radish, which is like a local version of Blue Apron, which is hyper-local and deals with food insecurity in Howard County. People need to know that the Montgomery County Food Council, in the midst of all the problems of the pandemic, began doing SNAP outreach and reaching out to folks who were eligible. People need to understand that the Baltimore Food Bank coordinated hundreds of food giveaways throughout the city. And I'm not saying that all of these only happen in those areas, because they happen all over the state. But a coordination and a sharing of best practices is what this Resiliency Council can do. I'm going to do one last part. I want you to understand the size and the scope of the dimension that's here. You know, in Maryland in 2020, we reached the highest level of SNAP participation in the state's history, over 844,000 people. We currently have over 180,000 people participating in the WIC program in the Department of Health for women's, infants, and children. In school meals in Maryland, we have 900,000 students, but about 45% of them are eligible for free and reduced price meals or participate in community eligibility. Hundreds of thousands of students. And coordinating this and understanding this not to avoid duplication, but to make sure that we are coordinating all of the different elements here is critical. Maryland did not have this at the beginning of the pandemic, but we would be ashamed if we didn't use this opportunity to be thoughtful and move forward for the next challenges that we're going to face. And with that, I reserve my time and be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Thank you very much. Let's go to Willie Lance from the Western Maryland Food Council. Mr. Lance, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky and members of the Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. I'm Willie Lance. I chair the Western Maryland Food Council, and I farm in Garrett County. I helped form the Western Maryland Food Council and got involved in food system work to increase the sustainability of local food production. While in one of the most rural counties in Maryland, Garrett County only produces around 1% of the food that is consumed within the county. In Maryland, consumers spend over $24 billion each year on food. Maryland total agriculture production is about $2.4 billion per year. A majority of the food produced here in Maryland leaves the state, is processed, and comes back into the state. Maryland is highly dependent on the food system to feed our citizens. Not until the COVID-19 pandemic have we been aware of how fragile the food system is. Within a few days, in many of our areas, we're low in food supplies due to transportation and labor issues. I work with a group of local farmers that have formed a cooperative to market fresh fruits and vegetables to local restaurants and grocery stores. We were very concerned in March as to the fate of these farms, as a majority of the sales were to restaurants that had either closed or had limited capacity. Fortunately, it turned out well. Many of the restaurants, while some of the restaurants never did open and we lost all their sales, we did have fairly good sales and worked with some folks in West Virginia for food banks and various other things, and would have liked to work more in the state of Maryland. We need statewide organization, coordination, and leadership for our food system to work through situations like the COVID-19 pandemic, and just as important, to make continual improvement in our food system from production to the consumer. I urge you to support Senate Bill 723 as a beginning step in developing a more resilient food system in Maryland.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lance. Ms. Palmer from Johns Hopkins.
Good afternoon, Chair Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. This is Ann Palmer, and I'm an associate scientist at the Bloomberg School of Public Health and a professor at the Hopkins Center for the Global Future, an academic center focused on food systems and public health. In my role at the center, I direct a project called Food Policy Networks, which builds the capacity of food policy council through technical assistance, resource development, and networking. The views expressed here are my own. If there was ever a time for food policy councils to prove their value, it has been during the pandemic. Our research found councils have responded quickly and steadfastly to meet their community's needs. They continue to play a key role. In our region, the Montgomery County Food Council serves as the lead nonprofit guiding the county's food security efforts, bring a coordinated response to the increased food needs that also leverages local producers. Frederick County Food Council launched an online market with 103 members and 9 producers. Baltimore Food Policy Initiative implemented online SNAP and secured state and federal funding for food. Prince George's Food Equity Council connected retailers, restaurants, farmers markets, and growers to market opportunities that address both their needs of food insecure residents. At the state level, the Delaware Food coordinated with state and local food providers, cooperative extension, and other agencies to collect data food distribution to improve sustainability. They also amended their existing statewide food resources map to identify COVID-specific food resources at the community level. In Pennsylvania, the Governor's Food Security Partnership advocated for waivers important for inclusive school meal SNAP access. Food System Resiliency Council could play a similar role in our state, leveraging relationships, expertise, and resources to meet urgent and longer-term needs of healthier food systems. I applaud Senate Bill 732 for proposing the establishment of a Food System Resiliency Council. The pandemic has exposed what we have known all along. Food system issues are best understood by bringing together a variety of stakeholders, knowledge and expertise that is needed to solve so many of our problems. Wait until the next pandemic or natural disaster to take action on what we know is an important. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Palmer. And finally, Colby Ferguson from the Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Colby Ferguson on behalf of Maryland Farm Bureau. And we support Senate Bill 723. I think it's a great tool to try to get some coordination. If we didn't find out anything from prior to the pandemic, but trying to just work through the procurement process before, the 2020 just kind of showed that we are way out of whack on trying to get products from the farm to the table. And anything that we can do to try to streamline that process is needed. It's just a coordination. It's a cluster really, and it's really difficult to go through the process. And honestly, I spent the better part of this morning working on trying to help two of our current meat processing facilities in the center part of the state try to get through a nightmare of problems that they're having with USDA right now to stay open, much less try to open up more opportunities for local processing. And so we desperately need something like this to be a more coordinated effect to help work with the governor's office and really kind of streamline some of these projects, because honestly, trying to work at the federal level one-on-one is very, very difficult. And having something like this, I think, is going to help both nationally at the national level as well as throughout the state. So with that, I hope you will move favorable on Senate Bill 723.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. And there are no opponents listed. Seeing no questions, that concludes the hearing on 723. Thank you, Senator Hester.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody.
Let's go to 737. Senator Rosapep, are you with us?
I am.
Okay, this is Comprehensive Conservation Finance Act. Following the presentation from Senator Rosapep, we'll have Timothy Mayle, Katie Fritz, and Nicholas Dilks. And while I look at the witness list, there is no one signed up orally or with written testimony in opposition. So with that, Senator Rosapep, please present your bill.
Thank you very, very much. This is complicated in detail and simple in concept. Basically, it's designed to take the tools that we have to do more conservation better, faster, cheaper. This has been going on in a whole lot of areas. Those of us in Prince George's County know the stormwater program we have there that's pay for performance, that has a public-private partnership that has driven the investment to the places where the payoff for the Bay is greatest. And essentially, this is the same concept statewide on a bigger scale. It's entirely designed to get to our environmental goals faster, cheaper, and better. And with that, I'll turn it over to the experts who will describe the complicated details.
Okay, that's fine. Timothy Mayle from the Environmental Policy Innovation Center.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the committee. One quick question. We sent some slides in, and I don't know if it's possible to display those, but if not, we can move forward without them.
Ms. Stanton, is that possible?
Yes. Yep.
Bear with us for a moment.
1 second. Pulling it up right now.
And just while you're doing that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dr. Timothy Mayle. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. We're a 4-year-old conservation organization, and we focus on conservation that will help environmental progress happen faster. I previously worked at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and I was also a council member in Tacoma Park for 3 terms. So thank you for the slides. If you could go to the third slide. One more, sorry. Thanks. I'll start here. Senator Rosa Peps and co-sponsors bill started in a series of working groups that began in late 2019. It included federal, state, county agencies, businesses, and nonprofits. And the core concept was, how can we help Maryland get its fair share of what is a growing amount of capital that's available from private conservation investment? Next slide, please. What do I mean by private conservation investment? Private conservation investment is simply a subset of environmental work that used to be probably dependent on charity or government payments exclusively, but now there's at least a limited opportunity to make a profit or a return from that work. More and more businesses and investors want to finance and carry out environmental work that achieves public goals. And for me, at least, this expansion of new money into conservation is one of the most exciting things that I've seen happen in conservation in 25 years. So just examples of a couple of markets that exist already. There's about $4.8 billion per year right now happening in transactions where the private sector provides services to restore and enhance wetlands and streams to offset damages caused by, for example, development projects. So instead of taxpayers having to subsidize repair of those damages, it's happening through private transactions in a very well-regulated system, driven by strong state and federal regulations. That's more than $4.5 billion across the U.S. On the carbon market space, this is a voluntary market space. The estimated size of the demand for things like soil carbon improvements or soil health improvements, forest restoration related carbon is something like $30 to $50 billion of purchases per year from companies that are doing this because their shareholders or their owners demand it, or because the risks of climate change actually have a material risk to the things that the businesses do. Virginia and Pennsylvania are doing fairly well when it comes to participating in this carbon market. Maryland a little less so. I won't describe it, but the other space is loans. So there's a lot of interest from the private sector in providing loans, loan capital into conservation and restoration work. Private finance is not new to Maryland or new to the Chesapeake Bay. And a sort of back of the envelope analysis we did found about $4 billion of spending over the last 20 years coming from private, profit-seeking sources into conservation goals. Most of those are focused on the water quality of the bay. Again, a lot of that's gone to Virginia and Pennsylvania. So our goal was to figure out how can we help Maryland get a fair share of this money. Next slide, please. And just sort of last 3 points I'll make about some details of the bill. The first piece is around green and blue infrastructure. So the revolving loan programs that MDE runs and that are backed by the federal government for all 50 states are really one of the biggest areas of water infrastructure finance in the country, the most successful. Many states have used those programs really creatively. And what we've tried to do in this bill is bring some of those creative ideas from other states into Maryland. So for example, one of the pieces, and this is focused on environmental justice, is to allow the program or make clear that the program can be used to replace toxic lead service lines, lead water pipes, that's an acceptable use for these revolving loan programs. Another is to let either private companies or nonprofit companies use loan guarantees, not loans, but loan guarantees to back green bonds and environmental impact bonds. What that effectively does is it allows them to raise money from the private market, but at a lower interest rate. Next slide, please. On the carbon and climate change front, the bill would make oyster reef restoration and seagrass restoration into co-benefits that would be considered in DNR's Bay Trust Fund. This doesn't change the core purpose of the program around water quality at all, but it ensures that DNR is looking for win-win opportunities to deliver equity or carbon benefits or climate resilience benefits at the same time that we get Bay water quality benefits. The bill also addresses private forest landowners and farmers' interests in tapping into those carbon credit markets that I mentioned earlier by giving encouragement both to DNR and to the Department of Agriculture to bring in outside experts and create working groups to try to figure out how to get through some of the roadblocks that are keeping Maryland producers from accessing those markets. And then the last slide, please. And then the piece that Senator Rosa Peps mentioned, the bill brings in a definition of environmental outcome into the procurement code of Maryland and defines pay for success as an eligible contracting mechanism that the state can use. For example, on the environmental outcome piece, the Biden-Harris administration is talking about defining environmental outcomes like carbon.
Mr. Maley, you're going to have to conclude.
Okay. Yep, thank you. And so I just mentioned that those contracting mechanisms allow us to tap into more federal funding and also bring the private sector more to bear on Maryland conservation. Thank you.
Thank you. Although I think you may have buried the lead on that one in terms of the quantifiable outcomes. But thank you, very informative. Let's go with Kate Fritz, followed by Nicholas Dilks.
Thank you, Senator Pinsky and Senator Kagan and this committee for allowing the opportunity to testify in support of SB 737. My name is Kate Fritz, and I serve as the CEO of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, a nonprofit that was established 50 years ago that focuses on bringing together communities, companies, and conservation groups to restore the lands and waters of the Chesapeake. As an organization doing boots on the ground work here in Maryland and across the rest of the Chesapeake Bay, this bill has important implications for the ability of the restoration community to accelerate restoration efforts by leveraging more private capital in an equitable way that will help us achieve our water quality goals. Members of this committee have copies of our letter of support that explains the many reasons why the Alliance supports this bill, but I would like to highlight a few proposed sections of the bill that particularly align with the Alliance's ongoing programmatic goals. This includes defining blue infrastructure to include blue carbon. We would be the first state in the United States to do so. With over 3,000 miles of shoreline in the state of Maryland, it is important to recognize the value of our marshes and areas of tidal interface that provide carbon sequestration. Defining them as part of blue infrastructure will ensure their protection and restoration. This bill expands the definition of green infrastructure to include climate resilience, and there is no larger pressure shaping the future of the Chesapeake Bay restoration effort than climate change. It is imperative that we broaden the toolbox that we've built to build in more climate resiliency into our green infrastructure efforts, a true co-benefit of this work. Additionally, this bill clarifies that state revolving funds can be used for watershed protection and forest conservation and restoration, including urban tree canopy. This enables expanded funding opportunities for this type of ecological work. I will stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. Let's hear from Mr. Dilks, and then we will open up for questions.
Yes, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and the committee for hearing this bill and my testimony in support of the bill. My name is Nicholas Dilks. I'm the managing partner of a firm called Ecosystem Investment Partners that I co-founded in 2006. We are based in Baltimore, Maryland, and we are a land and water restoration company that engages private investment capital, nearing $1 billion that we've secured over the past decade, focused solely on restoring things like wetlands and streams and other natural features across the United States under these types of pay for success or pay for performance programs. Over the past just 6 years, we've restored over 20 miles of Maryland streams to improve water quality, aquatic habitat, and reduce flooding. Actually, all of that paid for under these types of pay for success programs, but that were really pulled together in an ad hoc way, I would say, to achieve the desired outcomes of our customers to achieve those environmental offset and benefit projects. We support the bill for a variety of reasons, but maybe more specifically 2 places. One is to explicitly authorize the type of pay for success competitive procurement of environmental outcomes that Tim Mayle spoke to earlier. Again, today it's done, but really in an ad hoc way, and so this would explicitly allow for it and actually allow firms like us to compete to bring those projects forward in a very cost competitive and high quality way. The other is to really encourage private companies and investors like our company to actively partner with environmental organizations and local land trusts. We partnered, for instance, in Maryland with the Cecil Land Trust in Northeast Maryland to do most of the stream restoration, where they were able to engage the local farming community, private landowners to conserve and restore their streams, while we provide the capital and the expertise to achieve that on a pay for success basis. There's huge potential, and Maryland really deserves to be a leader in the space. In many ways it has been, but this bill really would codify that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dilks. Question for any of the proponents? Interesting concept. The details get a little long, but I think we have been presented with a lot of information for the concept. Seeing no questions, Thank you, Senator Roosevelt, for presenting this and bringing these expert witnesses. Thank you. I'm sure there'll be further follow-up conversation.
Thanks a lot.
That concludes the hearing on that bill. Let us move to Senator Washington 765, Sexual and Gender Minorities, Amari's Business Pride Act. Senator Washington will be followed by Terry Thwett. And then I'm not sure they're here, Raphael Ortiz and Jonathan Lovitz.
Correct. Great.
So Senator Washington, you've got.
Thank you so much. I'm unmuted. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you so much, committee. I really appreciate this opportunity. So many of us, we do pass legislation. We have bills that are brought to us by our constituents. We have bills that are brought to us because we have a personal interest in terms of who we are. And this bill is one of those that intersects both of those for me. Just some background about on the issue. You know, in May 15, 2001, Paris Denning, our former governor, signed into law an Anti-Discrimination Act, saying that we would no longer discriminate in Maryland against individuals based on sexual orientation. So that was in 2001. And then in 2012, legislation to remove the 1973 banning of civil marriage was affirmed by our voters, and it became law in 2013, 11 years later than the initial anti-discrimination. A year after that, this body affirmed and added gender identity to be added to our anti-discrimination laws in housing and the workplace. As an African-American, as a woman, this focused on basic rights and the ability to provide protections from discrimination and assault for ourselves and our family is very common. And so is the next move to remove barriers from being full economic actors, regardless of who we are, of what our race is and our sex is. And in SB 765, it addresses who we love and our gender. So I also have to offer today that today is the 13th anniversary of the passing of my father, Willie Washington. And he instilled in me a belief in a higher power, but also in hard work and fairness, and that you do what's right and you fight for what's right. I benefited perfectly from the fact that my dad accepted who I am. He supported who I was and always encouraged me to be open and honest about who I am. Unfortunately, we still live in a world in which many people who identify as LGBTQ, whether in business or in their daily lives, don't have that affirmation or that right. So what SB 765 does, it provides a mechanism to begin to expand the definition of socially and economically disadvantaged individuals for the purposes of certifying minority and business enterprise. And it's going to include sexual and gender minorities. So right off the bat, I just want to say this is not about cutting into a small piece of pie. It's about doing what we do in this state and doing what we do in our lives is to grow our notion of protections, grow our notion of inclusiveness, and remove barriers from individuals from being who they fully are and enabling them to contribute. Currently in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and California, they've passed similar legislation. 13 cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, Tampa, Nashville, Seattle, they've already recognized LGBT business certified enterprises. And the following states like Oregon and our neighbors, New York and New Jersey and Delaware, Connecticut and Illinois are poised this session to do the same thing. So also when we pass this legislation, it doesn't automatically go into effect. There still has to be a study that's going to affirm that there is discrimination that's happening, that there is a disparate impact. So there's some work to be done there. In 2019, however, the Maryland Public Service Commission did approve a policy to include the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, who you're going to hear from, as a certified LGBT business enterprise in contracting and procurement opportunities. So we're starting to move there. So it's really important to hear some key points before I pass it on to our speakers. Including LGBT businesses will not take anything away from communities already in the MWBE contracting pool. There are no set-asides in this policy. There's only aspirational goals and intentional inclusion. The National LGBT Chamber of Commerce is going to talk to you about that. Also, our economy simply does not work without full participation of everyone. Social progress cannot be achieved, and economic progress, particularly in COVID, but in any time, we need full participation of everyone. More diverse suppliers can help Maryland achieve its diversity, help save taxpayer dollars, and also just put more money in the pockets of Marylanders. LGBT business owners add over $1.7 trillion to the overall US economy. Maryland would become the largest economy in the region to recognize LGBT businesses in contracting programs. Expanding this definition will help us compete for state contracts. And again, it will just add to the solutions of ensuring that all Marylanders are able to contribute and be who they are. For these reasons, and for many, many more that my panelists will talk about, we'll ask you to vote favorably on SB 765. And I just want to say the lead panel, again, is Terrence Threat. He's a constituent. He's currently a JD candidate at the University of Baltimore School of Law. And frankly, he brought this bill on behalf of a family member, which he will tell you about. And again, why I told the story about my father, that all of us are forever grateful that we have family members that love us for who we are, who support us in these fights. And I look forward to you having an opportunity to hear what he has to say. And then we will hear from Jonathan Lovitz. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Washington. Mr. Threat, followed by Mr. Lovitz and Mr. Ortiz.
Everybody, my name is Terrence Threat. So first off, thank you all for bearing with me through my technical difficulties earlier, particularly Ms. Stanton, who we got to laugh off of that. But anyways, hello everyone, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to testify today. Thank you particularly to my senator, Senator Washington, for sponsoring this bill. I'm the older brother of Imari, the namesake of this bill. He was a transgender man that started his own business in 2013 in the face of physical harassment and discrimination. Thankfully, he had a loving family that did all that we could to support and fight on his behalf, which we continue to do today. Before his death, he became a certified painter by Civic Works and started doing so professionally in homes in Baltimore City. Sadly, he died by suicide after experiencing being physically attacked on the job and in the public multiple times in 2019. If passed, SB 765 and its House counterpart will commission a disparity study and approve the use of, or the subsequent action is to approve the use of LGBTE businesses to engage in state contracting. Why is this needed? For the government, it allows more companies to participate in state contracting opportunities and lower the cost for taxpayers. For businesses, it allows those traditionally locked out to due to both implicit and explicit discrimination to engage in state contracting opportunities, promoting small business growth, development, and employment. Some may say that statistically speaking, some in the LGBT community are high earners. Why would they need state contracting? Well, despite societal advancements, there is still cultural biases that exist that hinder LGBT business growth, especially those owned by Black and transgender individuals. According to the American Progress magazine and Pew Research Center, transgender and Black LGBT individuals face even greater wealth gaps that can be directly correlated to their income, networking opportunities, and discrimination in employment. And that's not to mention the housing and other effects. What this bill does not do is to take opportunities away from other designated minority groups. Existing targeted demographics will maintain the existing continued targeting contracting levels, which have the potential to grow as the state changes that demographically. By following the lead of states such as California and Massachusetts and Baltimore City Executive Order 2018-2, the Amari Business Pride Act will expand contracting opportunities and promote a more inclusive business culture in the great state of Maryland. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to Mr. Lovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the committee. It's wonderful to be here with you, and I have to first extend my deepest thanks and appreciation to Senator Washington and to Terry. Your dad and your brother would be so proud of you, and we are so grateful for your leadership. I am here to joining you on behalf of the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, the certifying body for LGBT businesses across America, on what you may not know is a historic day. 2 hours ago, the mayor of Houston, Texas, just made Houston the 25th city in America to include LGBT-owned businesses in city contracting. If we can get it done in Texas, we can get it done anywhere. It's time for this to be done nationally, and it will start with the leadership of all of us right here in Maryland. You all, of course, have my full testimony and a helpful FAQ in your bill packet, but a couple of things that I can't let, that have to be said so that we're all on the same page here. As the senator said, this is about beginning a journey. Nothing has changed. The system is not altered. This is how we carefully study LGBTQ inclusion so that we build a path toward goals. For example, the state of California is now in its 5th year of LGBT inclusion and is just this year beginning to study, to analyze its participation to set that goal for the first time. So one of the reasons why we need to do this and add LGBTQ people to the state definition of diverse communities is we can't be found otherwise. The government does not track us in the same way you can find racial and gender minorities based on demographic data. So that's why we have created a national certification that's in use across the Fortune 500 and now in more and more cities and states across America to help identify and vet and verify LGBT-owned companies for these supplier diversity initiatives. You're going to hear from business owners about what this means to them, but I need to tell you what this means to the economy. As the senator said, when we have more competition, bid prices come down, which means more taxpayer savings and dollars to be reinvested into the bridges and firefighters and minority economic development programs that we all need. There is also a special focus on in contracting programs like this on particularly Black equity, which matters in a year like this and in a state like Maryland. For an example of why we have to do that, because right here in my home of Philadelphia, a Black business owner was awarded their chamber's Business Owner of the Year recently. They asked, who would you like to present your award to you on stage? And he said, my husband. Suddenly the award was revoked and he was no longer eligible. Being a Black intersectional LGBT business enterprise gave him the emotional and fiscal safety to say, this is who I am, this is who I will be in business, take it or leave it. And
thank you. Mr. Lovitz, you've got to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ortiz.
Hello, good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky, Madam Chairwoman, Kagan, and everyone else here. I want to first say thank you for everyone for giving us a little bit of your time. We understand, especially now during COVID and the last year that we've had, if anything that we can take out of this is the appreciation of everyone's time and people as human beings. It's been a tough year. And again, I appreciate everyone being here. I am here representing the Maryland LGBT Chamber of Commerce as a board member and a CEO of Brock Consulting Group supporting SB 765. We are not only a certified LGBTBE through the NGLCC, but we are also a Maryland MBE, DBE, SBE. So we are very aware and we understand that the metrics that Maryland has to certify somebody under those guidelines are very strict. And of course they should be, because Maryland wants to make sure that anybody who they're allowing into that program can not only perform their work, but can exceed and do a great job. For me, as a gay man from Puerto Rico, I was raised in a religious organization and it made me hate who I was. You know, it was a culture that not only was homophobic, but it had zero tolerance over any deviation of who I was if I wasn't a straight man. To the point where at 18 years old, I actually contemplated seriously suicide. So my heart definitely goes out to Terry's brother and his family, because to be in that headspace and to go through with that is very, very difficult. And it really takes a toll on somebody. before I was able to actually break free from the ideologies of the religion and the culture and everything, it was kind of like you're instantly born and you have this, think of chains that go around you. And not only do these chains go around you the moment you're born, but these chains are actually lined with rust. And that rust represents the decades and the hundreds of years of thought processes that are brought onto people if they're not straight, if they're not cis, if they don't fall into what society has said should be normal. So to get to a point where I loved and embraced who I was, it took me a while. But the moment I realized that love was the factor, loving myself, understanding that I do matter and that I bring something to society, was that magic key, to break free from those chains. Biology teaches us that a diverse population isn't an advantage. The more diverse a population is, the more it can adapt. And that's the same thing for businesses. If we have a diverse population of businesses that bring their best to the table, we can have better competition. Everybody wins.
Mr. Ortiz, you'll have to wrap it up. Your time is up.
Yes. So for me, why I am a business owner, why I want to do this is not only was I not given a chair at the table, I created my own table, and I want to do the same thing for others, to bring them to the table and to understand that you're here. We appreciate you. We're creating a business, and you have a place where you can thrive. Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have, let's see, first off, Mr. Lovitz, congratulations on Houston. Mr. Ortiz, you might win the 2021 acronym using gold prize, gold medal. We try not to use acronyms just so that everybody understands what you're talking about. Senator Washington, can you just explain, does someone get kind of double points or double access if they are a, lesbian, veteran, small business owner, woman of color? Like, is this an add-on or is this its own? And I apologize if you covered that. I had to run and get my COVID test.
Not a problem. Well, it's funny because pretty much when I came out to my mother, she asked me, why would I want to do that? You're adding, it's a negative. So from initially, so again, fortunately, she loves me for who I am. No, it doesn't.
We all do, Senator.
We just passed legislation to allow the state to just be, we're getting ready to pass legislation to allow the state to be able to count when people are women and African-American. We just passed that. So there's no extra points in this system. And again, as was articulated, this is just starting the process. It has to be established that there is discrimination, that there's social and economic disadvantage based on solely being LGBTQ. That's how that works. Also, Chairman, I apologize. It looks like there was a miscommunication. Betsy Cirillo is also here. I just wanted the committee just to be able to say hello to her just real quick. She's also a business owner and a constituent. So there was a little mix up there. So I hope I answered that question.
Ms. Cirillo, if you want to take a quick minute, we're just about done the hearing and there's no opposition. But if you'd like to, we had you as crossed out, but if you want to take a quick minute, literally, that'd be great.
Great. Thank you. I just want to say, Senator Washington, thank you so much for bringing this to the table for discussion. And Terry, having testified with you in the House hearing, just really appreciate the continued journey. I just want to say here, as a 31-year-old company, I'm really here, not for myself. I'm a certified MBE, DBE, and LGBTE. I'm really here for the generations up and coming, especially for the LGBTs that have been hit so hard through COVID. If they can reemerge having this now as an opportunity to add, I can tell you there's going to be an added level of pride as they are writing the proposals, to know that we can walk into a room, virtually or physically, and not be laughed at. That we are part of the conversation and that we are ready to do business with Maryland. And of course, Maryland, as progressive as we are going to lead the way in the southern states to make this happen. So I just wanted to say, I really appreciate this conversation today and the opportunity to be out and talk about how to grow business in Maryland.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cerullo. Congratulations on your business. I see no other hands. There's no opposition. A great presentation. That concludes the hearing on that bill. We will move to 780, which is sponsored by the chairman. Emergency procurement and budget amendments. I will present, followed by Cecilia Plant and Vince McAvoy, and I don't believe there's any opposition. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, early this summer, we know a number of tests were purchased from a foreign country. We know a number of masks were purchased from a newly opened shop from Washington. And some months later, I can't remember how many, we actually had a hearing to better understand those purchases. We called DGS and a number of other people. Some of the answers were enlightening, some kept us mystified. What this bill does is fairly straightforward and simple. It says within 72 hours of an emergency procurement during a state of emergency, the administration must notify the LPC, Legislative Policy Committee, so they can look at it, review it, and if necessary, request an audit. It doesn't stop it. It still goes through the normal procedure, Board of Public Works. It shouldn't take 2, 4, 6, or 7 months or digging by the press to find out if there was an abuse or an inappropriateness. And as one of our committee members, Senator Lamb, has always pointed out, even the original purchase of the tests were incomplete. In the manifest, it only showed a half or only some of the elements needed for a successful test. You know, this is a check and balance. It's transparency. That's what it does. It doesn't stop it. It requires a notification to the LPC. That's what the bill does. There is an amendment, however. I think at one point in the bill, it calls for everything to be audited. We trimmed that back. We don't want to have unnecessary audits. So there will be an amendment. If you don't have it, it will be offered at the next time this comes up at a voting session. With that being said, is Ms. Plant with us? Cecilia Plant? Hearing nothing. Mr. McAvoy? Okay, well, that's a quick hearing. Any questions for me? The others are all written and in favor or for information. Questions? Okay, that completes that hearing. I'm sure we're all pleased to have a quick hearing. Let's go back to Senator Hester, if we can. 822, Maryland Emergency Management Agency Office of Resilience. Senator Hester will present. She'll be followed by Eugene Henry, Wyoming Office of Homeland Security. Thank heavens he didn't have to travel so far. Followed by Kelly Leo and Amanda Martin. Senator Hester, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Senator Katie FreyHester, thank you for your consideration of Senate Bill 822. And I do have an excellent panel traveling all the way from around the country virtually, so that's one benefit. As you all know, as a coastal state with tributaries and lots of impacts of climate change, we're seeing the sea level rise, and the projected increase in the frequency and severity of flooding is something many of us have experienced. Today, we have 81,000 Marylanders at risk of coastal flooding, with 38,000 more projected to be at risk by 2050. In the same time frame, our state is projected to face up to $19 billion worth of damage due to sea level rise and flooding. So that's the context in which I bring you Senate Bill 822. Earlier this year, you heard me present on the bill that creates the Chief Resilient Officer of Maryland. That bill passed the Senate unanimously last year, but then it was stalled in the House due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But during the interim, we've continued to meet, and the Maryland Emergency Management Agency has talked about their their desire to set up the Office of Resilience. They've given this quite a bit of thought. So this bill reflects that vision. The Office of Resilience within the Maryland Emergency Management Agency would be responsible for guiding the state's resilience initiatives. This office would also be responsible for administering the federal emergency management, the FEMA mitigation grant programs and recovery and focus programs, coordinating with the Maryland Department of the Environment to administer the National Flood Insurance Program, administering the state mitigation grants, and developing flood risk assessment tools for use by statewide programs and projects. This office is comparable to those from other states, and that's why I'm so pleased to have this great panel here today. In 2018, the North Carolina legislature established the Office of Recovery and Resilience in their Department of Public Safety following the devastation of Hurricane Florence. We might hear some about that today. NCOR is responsible for administering funds received by the state through the U.S. Housing and Urban Development's Community Development Block Grants for disaster recovery. And the office also partners with local government, state agencies, and community organizations to improve resilience and overall health. And this office is, of course, led by the North Carolina Chief Resilience Officer. So I'm going to turn it over and let our two panelists talk about what they do and how they do it and why they sit where they sit within their government. But in general, the more capacity I think we have to coordinate these efforts, the more efficient Maryland's resilience system will be as a whole. We can save lives, save livelihoods, and reduce the cost of natural disasters in the process. So with that, I respectfully request a favorable report from this committee, and I will turn it over. Thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
That's usually my line, but I'm guilty. Let's welcome Mr. Eugene Henry from the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security. Mr. Henry.
Actually, it's Lynn Budd, and I am here for Eugene Henry as he is very new to the position in our state. I am the director of the Office of Homeland Security, which includes emergency management. Our office resides within the governor's office, and I'm a member of Governor Gordon's cabinet. Our state is pretty large with not very many people, 98,000 square miles and 600,000 residents, which makes us a frontier state with less than 6 people per square mile. However, we do have hazards that happen in our state that affect our population, and mostly flooding. And our office handles the FEMA disaster and mitigation grants, as well as the National Flood Insurance Program. We decided to develop a position, the resilience position within our office, due to several situations that have happened in our state, and really the lack of population in our state as well. We have to be resilient. People have to be able to take care of themselves, but we want to also be competitive in the federal grant world of mitigation, and that is going to require partnerships. So our resilience officer is going to be responsible for working with different state and federal organizations to find funding to create bigger, more competitive projects on the national level. We find that it's much better and less costly to prepare for disasters and for the recovery from disasters than it is to pay for the damages that are done. And again, as Senator Hester said, we want to save lives. We want to save critical infrastructure. We want to make sure that we do the best that we can in recovery as we do in preparedness and response. We also have a budget shortage in our state, as do our local communities. So one of the other reasons why this person is going to be on board is to help develop sources of funding to meet the 25% match that is required for FEMA disaster funding to be implemented, as well for disasters as well as for mitigation. There just isn't that available non-federal funding at the local level or even at the state level. So we have to get creative. We have to work with our state partners, which include the Water Development Commission, the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund, Game and Fish, and other partners, as well as federal agencies, including half of our state is also federal land. So we have good federal partners, the U.S. Forest Service. BLM is Bureau of Land Management in our world, and all of the people, National Resource Conservation Service, as well as nonprofits, including groups like the Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, anybody who has dollars that are not federal dollars. We are in the process of developing this position within our mitigation team, and actually are very excited to see that Maryland is doing the same thing, and have worked with Russell Strickland, as well as Mike Sprayberry in North Carolina. We sit on the Resilience Committee for the National Emergency Management Agency, and so we all have to work together to try and become more resilient and get through recovery faster. So we appreciate the fact that Maryland's moving forward with this and are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Budd. Ms. Leo.
Thank you, Chairman Pinsky, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today in support of Senate Bill 822. For the record, my name is Kelly Leo, and I'm here representing the Nature Conservancy as the director of our Resilient Coast program for our Maryland DC chapter. Senate Bill 822 establishes an Office of Resilience within MEMA to coordinate state and local responses to climate impacts and streamline and leverage funding opportunities to achieve resilience at scale. Many other states across the US, like we've heard before, have already established similar offices. Most often this has happened through governor's executive order post-disaster to help expedite recovery spending. So establishing the Office of Resilience proactively would afford Maryland and its local governments more capacity to capitalize on the very significant amount of funding that's just now made available for the first time ever through FEMA's new funding program, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC. And for those that aren't aware, the BRIC program is funded by a 6% set aside from post-disaster grant expenditures from the previous year, which means that our nation's horrible misfortune during COVID has resulted in a very substantial allocation secured for resilience funding in the coming years. So while we understand that the fiscal note for this office is challenging at this very difficult time, the price tag for adaptation is astronomical. Like Ms. Budd was saying, studies show that every dollar invested in pre-disaster mitigation saves up to $6 in post-disaster recovery expenditures, so the time to act really is now. The Office of Resilience would have a very strong foundation to start from and wouldn't need to reinvent the wheels. Like I said to you before, just realign them in close coordination with the suite of agencies that already participate in the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. At the local level, we're seeing aspects of resilience planning are often being rolled into hazard mitigation plan updates. And these plans already need to be approved by FEMA and MEMA, and they can be used to identify adaptation projects that can be funded through programs like BRIC. The impacts of climate change we know are not distributed across the landscape evenly. Smaller rural governments have less access to adaptation funding that they often disproportionately need, and creating the Office of Resilience would improve our ability to access funds to strengthen pre-disaster mitigation coordination between FEMA, MEMA, and these local governments. We need a centralized place where we can have a dedicated group of experts coordinating across all sectors toward a shared vision for a resilient Maryland, increasing our capacity to access those resources that are out there. So we strongly urge a favorable report on 822, and I thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Leo. Let's go to Amanda Martin from North Carolina. Ms. Martin.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members for...
A little louder on the volume, Ms. Martin. Closer to the mic.
Is this any better?
A little.
All right, I'll shout. My name is Amanda Martin. I am Deputy Chief Resilience Officer in the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. We are an office within our Department of Public Safety, and I'll be talking today a little bit about the value of our resilience work and specifically about its location in the Department of Public Safety. The North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency was established by the legislature in 2018 after Hurricane Florence, when the legislature recognized our need for additional capacity to handle our disaster recovery and resilience funding that was coming in. This was 2 years after we had experienced another devastating hurricane, Hurricane Matthew. We were established as a sibling agency to emergency management, and we share the same leadership as emergency management, Director Michael Sprayberry. Resiliency is just one part of what our office does, but I'll be talking to you today about that one part. I would say that our resilience team does 4 things. We advise state government and the governor on resilience. We convene state agencies to collaborate on resilience. We staff our state disaster recovery task force, which is an interagency, interorganizational, public-private partnership that focuses on disaster recovery in the state. And we also advise local governments and other organizations on resilience matters. Because you all are considering creating this office within your emergency management agency, I wanted to speak to the value specifically of being so closely located to emergency management. One element of that is the tremendous data resources that live within emergency management. Many of those also serve our resilience efforts. And so this is anything from risk analysis, floodplain mapping, any of the great data that emergency management holds. We want to be able to get that data into the hands of potential users. And we also want to make sure that it integrates climate change. So that's kind of one piece of our work with emergency management. A huge piece is the implementation resources or funding that emergency management holds. And for example, with the new FEMA program, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, we've been able to advise emergency management, work with them to staff our state's competitive application, and then to submit a competitive application up to the federal competition. And one final piece I wanted to mention about our relationship with emergency management is that disaster recovery is one of the greatest opportunities, unfortunately, that we have to put money into building back better and putting things into more resilient layout or fashion or format. And so the opportunity to work with the agencies that are implementing disaster recovery is a tremendous opportunity for the resilience team.
Thank you. Ms. Martin, you have to wrap up, please.
That's all I had to share, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there are no opponents to the bill. I don't believe. There are some letters of information. MDE has a letter that may be worth looking at or may not, depending on your view of MDE. Questions? Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, for the sponsor of the bill, and it seems like today is Senator Hester Day, so we're all taking our turns. Senator, I have 2 quick questions for you. One is, and I'm looking, I don't see whether MEMA or the administration, did they take a position, or did you talk to them about this? Are they at least amenable to it? Question 1. And question 2, as you know, both Senator Lamb and I believe that MEMA should be shifted from under the military department to an independent agency. If that were to pass, would that have any impact on this office, this proposal?
So second question first, if your legislation, which is wonderful legislation, Madam Vice Chair, was to pass, then I don't believe it would have any impact on this. It would still be housed there. And I actually think, given the procurement issues that we have, I think it would be easier for this office to be there. The first question was, remind me briefly.
Did your director support this? Does the administration support this? Are they amenable to it, basically?
Okay, so I've been working with MEMA for almost 2 years on this. They love the idea. They're already doing much of this work already. They could use some of the tools that are mentioned in this office. They could use those tools to enhance their project, as well as the additional capacity. So there is a letter of support or information from the Maryland Military Department. And it is my understanding through many phone calls that Director Strickland wanted to testify on this, but is still kind of waiting for approval. But given he was kind enough to introduce me to some of his colleagues from across the country. So I think the fact that we have Wyoming and North Carolina here, they attest to the interest of our local MEMA.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Let me ask a couple of very quick questions, and if they take long answers, we can talk offline. The Department of the Environment, in their letter of information, not taking a stand one way or the other, they cite two issues that concern them. One, the National Flood Insurance Program that they currently hold, and the language of the bill would say they would do it jointly. Any thoughts about that? I mean, as this is developed, and then I ask the second question.
Sure. So I believe that right now the user of that fund is MEMA. Like they have the most use of that fund. But in terms of the management of it, I don't know if Director Budd or Ms. Martin, either one of you could answer what's the benefit of having that program within the office?
I would take a stab at that if you would like, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman. We do house the National Flood Insurance Program within our office, and it is a part of preparedness. It's a part of working with communities to be better prepared to respond, to be able to independently respond to events in their in their communities. It's in fact, we try to work with our insurance commission to develop more products and more coordination with them. But we know the coordination with FEMA is imperative, and our office does that, as does your emergency management office, and that coordination and evaluation of risks is very important.
So, Senator, again, I appreciate what they do there. Would it be this new office, or would it be an MDE in terms of overseeing the national flood? And secondly, the National Flood Insurance Program also has an interrelationship or a cross-cutting with Coast Smart Council. So again, maybe it hasn't been worked out, but how you see under what auspices that's going to work. Having two agencies running it, I think we can all imagine will be a problem.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly looking forward and open to discussions with the agencies about this part of the program. I do personally feel, based on the research that I've done, that MEMA, as the primary user of it, I do think that they would be placed to lead. But I'm very happy to sit down with both agencies and continue the discussion.
Okay, and one final quick question.
Yes.
There's another bill, I don't want to say floating around, that's been introduced calling for a chief resiliency officer. How does that fit with this new office of resiliency?
Thank you for that question.
Two structures are being created, and I'm not sure.
No, they're the same structure. It's two separate bills. So the first bill, the chief resilience officer, was also within MEMA. I introduced that last year, and it passed this committee and the Senate unanimously. And then it died in the House because of the pandemic. So I simply pre-filed that bill because it was good to go. In the meantime, that original bill actually said that that they should collaborate to figure out how best to organize the office, and that work continued over the interim. So we've actually got like 2 or 3 page white paper about how we should structure this new Office of Resilience. And so that was then introduced, early in January as an extension of the work that I had done the previous year. But the way the structure is currently envisioned is that the Chief Resilience Officer would be within MEMA and would head the office. However, upon your wonderful advice, I did talk to Miss Zoe, I can't remember her name.
Johnson.
Yes. So we had two great conversations. Now, this is somebody who used to work at DNR and is now at the military and is in charge of, resilience for the Navy here in Annapolis. And she said, she really likes the idea, but she thought that it would be great to have the Chief Resilience Officer in the governor's office. And so I started to think about that, like, how could that work? How could you have the person in the office, the governor, but then the office itself within MEMA? And I thought of a perfect correlation, which is how DO-IT is structured. Our state CISO, who's in charge of cybersecurity, has a direct report to the governor, but then he also is in the department in DO-IT. So we're still working out the kinks, but that is one thing I wanted to discuss with you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the hearing on this bill. Thank all of our long distance witnesses.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Senator Hester, Senator Lamb is stuck in another committee, so can we go to your next bill? Since
yes,
the chair said it seems to be Hester Day. So let's go to 901. Is that okay with you?
It's fine. Just let me pull up my points. Give me just 2 seconds.
Okay, sure. Well, we have the treasurer, Ms. Nancy Kopp. Welcome, Treasurer Kopp. Good to see you, as always. And then she'll be followed by Stephen Jordan, Institute for Sustainable Development. I hate to put you on the spot on quick notice, but we're trying to be nimble here, Senator FreyHester.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm just pulling up.
Okay.
It's all part of the same package. Okay, so Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Health, sorry, is this the right bill? Hold on one second. 901, I got it. So you've just heard my spiel about how important coastal flooding is and resilience. So I won't repeat all those wonderful details. I'm here today with Senate Bill 901 to give you some good news. We are capable of preparing for and managing a threat of this magnitude, but it will require resources, but I have a plan to bring down those resources from the federal level. This bill seeks to do that by establishing the Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund, something that we heard about earlier today. This once again would be housed in the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. The purpose of the fund is to provide low or no interest loans to governments to fund local resilience projects with a prioritization on projects that have the greatest impact on eliminating hazards and mitigating future disaster. Okay, there is more to this fund than initially meets the eye. On January 1st of 2021, the Federal Safeguarding Tomorrow Through Ongoing Risk Mitigation Act, or the STORM Act, this allows the FEMA administrator to provide capitalization grants to states in order to establish these type of loan funds. So we have carefully crafted this legislation to be able to pull down this money from the STORM Act. Since the STORM Act is designed with a 90-10 federal state matching requirement, if we were able to seed this revolving loan fund with $10 million, we could capitalize $90 million and get $100 million total. But the good news doesn't end there. As you will also see in the uncodified language intent, it directs MEMA to utilize this fund to provide localities with sufficient matching funds so as to fully utilize federal resilience grants like those provided through the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities BRIC grants, which we just heard about. These grants are intended to provide funding for projects aimed at mitigating future disaster risks and hazards. And this comes with a 75-25 federal local match. As this federal funding is generally tied to the previous year's disaster funding, unfortunately, because we've had a pandemic, there is a lot of disaster funding last year, and thus there's a lot of money in this pot. By utilizing this revolving loan fund, after securing capitalization through the aforementioned STORM Act, we can turn the $10 million of our initial investment into $100 million in the state revolving loan fund, and then turn that into $400 million, 25%, which will come from the revolving loan fund, and 75%, which will come in the form of grants through the BRIC program. So I just think that this bill is almost too good to be true. It's going to really help us to shore up, pun intended, our resiliency and to draw down money from the federal government to do just that. And for that reason, I request a favorable report for Senate Bill 901. And I have my star witness, who is the treasurer, who needs no introduction at all. She's a friend of all of us, Nancy Kopp.
Treasurer Kopp, welcome to the EHE. As I said, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been lurking for your entire agenda, and I think this committee just has a terrific set of issues to deal with. I'm a little bit jealous. When Senator Hester called us about this bill, she did because it calls for the treasurer to invest in a special fund where the interest recurs to the benefit of the fund rather than the general fund, and wondered whether this could be done. I appreciate her consultation. Yes, this certainly can be done, and we do it for other funds. And then our office started looking into the entire question, and I must say I have become quite enthusiastic. I don't usually like things that look too good to be true, because usually they're not true. But as far as we can tell, this is part of a integrated effort to really be efficient and to leverage what's available out there. And you know, Mr. Chairman, my interest in climate change and risk mitigation. This is one aspect of it, not the broad climate change. But clearly what happened in Ellicott City and what we're seeing around the state in terms of hazards is in significant part due to the impact of climate change. So this is one way that it seemed to our office that we could grapple with this question of risk control and mitigation while we are building a stronger and more resilient infrastructure. I would urge the committee to look very seriously at Senate Bill 901 and thank the sponsor for consulting our office.
You went to the right place. The treasurer is extremely knowledgeable about this subject and has been following it for many, many years, and actually created offspring who also have a great interest in it. Let's go to Stephen Jordan, then we'll open up the questions. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, and members of the Education and Environmental Affairs Committee. Thank you for this opportunity. The Institute for Sustainable Development has been focused on gaining a better understanding of how communities can become more resilient for many years. In fact, our mission is to catalyze resilience so that communities can realize their full potential. And unfortunately, the way that we currently do disaster management is we tend to be reactive and come after the fact instead of being proactive and anticipating climate change and anticipating what could happen in the future. And this process is extremely costly. So for the past 9 months, ISD, my group, and the Howard County Economic Development Authority, with the generous support of EDA, have been conducting a series of workshops with public and private sector partners to identify Maryland's future resilience needs. And the revolving loan fund concept has emerged as an important tool that as part of an integrated strategy to do this. The intent of the bill is to enhance Maryland's ability to make strategic resilience investments and to leverage available federal resources, because the costs of not doing this are potentially astronomical. And I'll get into that in a second. The way this is designed, MEMA would really have kind of a consultative function with the Chief Resilience Officer concept of making sure that they were connecting with the Department of Environment, that they were connecting with the different committees, so that they would be able to prioritize making loans to projects that would have the greatest impact on eliminating hazards. And I think that that coordinating role of the Chief Resilience Officer is going to be super important going forward. You know, another thing about this is that it's going to allow for a little bit swifter process to get things done. Money expended from the fund is supposed to be supplemental and not intended to take the place of funding that otherwise would be appropriated to local governments. And this means that this money can go to gaps or vulnerabilities that may arise. A lot of people tend to think, you know, that the climate is relatively stable or whatever, and that climate change can be incremental. But what can actually happen is that you can have a sudden shock that can really expose something that the projections might have said was 20 or 30 years off. And so as a result, this legislation will facilitate Maryland's ability to attract and deploy federal government funds. It will assist Maryland local governments to invest in cost-effective resilience measures And, you know, they say that an ounce of prevention idea is so true when it comes to resilience. They say that if you invest $1 in resilience, you can save up to $6 in post-disaster costs. And the need is overwhelming. According to NOAA, Maryland has had $60 billion events between 1980 and 2020. And would you believe that 25% of them have happened in the last 5 years? This is escalating tremendously. And if you just took the average cost of the last 5 years, that's $2 billion a year. You're looking at a $60 billion price tag by 2050. We have to bend the curve. We have to get out in front of this. And I think that this kind of revolving loan fund can really be a tool.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
No, thank you for your testimony as well as the treasurer. Questions for the sponsor or either of the two panelists? Senator Young, Senator Young, you can't ask questions.
I'm happy to take a question from Senator Young.
Well, I think we might need to stay muted for a little while.
Senator Penske, his bill is joint.
Yes, Senator Young, I'm sorry, I was being too irreverent. Thank you. You have to unmute, and we are going to start with Senator Young. He's down from budget and tax. It has implications, obviously, for the budget, achieving that money and gathering that money. Senator Young, I apologize. Please.
It's okay.
Join the conversation.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just a little clarification. I love the whole idea, but you started out with $10 million from the state and built it up to $400 million. Is all of that just for loans, or is part of that grants?
The answer is both. So what we do is we capitalize the loan fund with the $10 million for the state. That's a 90-10 match. We get 90 from the federal government. So we get $100 million worth of loans. Then if a town like Frederick wants to do a resiliency project, they could take out a loan from the revolving loan fund and use that as a match for the BRIC program, which would be a grant. So let's say that you wanted $40 million. You take out a $10 million loan from the fund, and then you get a $30 million grant from the federal government. Does that help?
Okay, yeah.
But it does seem a bit like a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, that is all part of the fund.
You're muted, Senator. Unmute Senator Young.
Yeah, I guess I got cut off. So it's really a loan grant program. It's not all going to be paid back because we are using federal money that was grant money in combination with the loan money.
Right. So in this case, out of the total 40 million in my example, they'd have to repay the 10, but they might not have been able to get that 30 million if they didn't have the loan in the first place.
Okay. I just wasn't hearing that part of it. I assumed that was right, and I'm glad it is. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Senator Young. Other questions from committee for the sponsor or the advocates? Seeing none, I guess everyone did a great job. That then concludes the hearing on that piece of legislation, 901. Thank you, Senator Hester, Madam Treasurer, Mr. Jordan, and Senator Young. I'm going to shift it to the Vice Chair for the next bill. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next bill is Senate Bill 829, Senator Lamb, Emergency and Expedited Procurements Reform.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Kagan. Senator Lamb is still in another committee.
Okay. So we get to hear from
Jennings, if
Senator
you could
Jennings.
go on to, he's present.
Yeah, I see him. I see his big smile on his face because he's very happy to be in EHA. Senator Jennings, Senate Bill 889, Controlled Hazardous Substance Facility Permit, Research Facilities, Chemical Warfare Material Requirements. You're going to kick us off, followed by Tom Albro with the Maryland Defense Research Coalition, and then Bryson Popham representing the Army Alliance, Robert Malone, CBC Public Affairs Office, and I'm sure he will tell us what CBC stands for. Why don't you kick us off? Welcome, Senator Jennings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished members of the committee, it's good to be back to my old committee, EHE. Again, Senator Jennings, on behalf of, we're here on Senate Bill 889. So let me give you a quick background on what the bill, why we're here, and what the bill does. So Aberdeen Proving Grounds is located in Harford County. It is over 100 years old, started in 1917. It has become the U.S. Army's #1 research facility. They test everything there from ammunition to body armor to chemical, biological weapons, all kinds of stuff that they do research on. As you know, turn of the century, during the First World War, mustard gas and other chemical warfare was used horribly. It actually caused changes internationally with the laws on how we handle that stuff. And the U.S. Army was tasked with getting rid of what was the U.S. stockpile. And we found, about 30, 40 years ago that we had tons of this stuff located. And APG through Edgewood Arsenal. So let me back up real quick. Aberdeen Proving Ground has a lot of subtenants that are parts of the United States Army, such as CBC, which is the Chemical Biological Center, CCOM, all kinds of other types of subcomponents of the Army are based there. But anyway, the United States Army was tasked with getting rid of all this mustard gas and destroying it. The state of Maryland stepped in and made sure we had environmental protections and enacted a series of statutes to ensure the disposal efforts of this mustard gas and other chemicals was done properly. Over the years, we've gotten rid of it. We went from hundreds of tons of this stuff to nothing left. If you might recall, about 6 years ago, Aberdeen Proving Ground through the CBC was tasked with going over to Syria because they found large stockpiles of chemical warfare over there, and the men and women of APG basically destroyed this stuff while they were over there. They actually did it on a ship at sea. But here we are, 2021, we've gotten rid of all this stuff. So that type of facility is no longer needed at Aberdeen Proving Ground. However, the world that we live in still has this stuff. Countries still use it on their own citizens. They use it against our own military. Because of that, we still have to do research and development on it to figure out how to inoculate it, how to treat it, how to protect ourselves, our men and women, when they're in uniform battling in it. So that's what this bill does, is it makes a minor change that applies only to the incineration of chemical warfare materials for research, development, and demonstration purposes. And again, the reason we're doing this is we're changing from being a destruction facility of getting rid of United States stockpiles of this type of chemical warfare to strictly, instead of destroying tons of this stuff, we're down to pounds of it that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis from what they're getting from other countries that are being used. Aberdeen Proving Ground is made up of, there's a lot of industry that works with them. The Army Alliance is one of their biggest lobbying groups, and these are all just independent companies that do work there, that are there to help represent, and that's what is who here, some of those individuals are here today to help testify on this legislation. There is an amendment that came from the Department of the Environment. I think it's clarifying that hopefully you guys would take into consideration. And that's pretty much it, trying to size it up. If you want, I can answer questions, or if you want to pass to the panel.
If we could pass to the panel first, Senator Jennings, and then we'll do the proponents. We'll see if there are questions for you or your panelists, and then we'll shift to the opponents. I am just looking at the folder. It seems like none of your proponents submitted written testimony. So if you have anything that would be helpful to the committee when we deliberate on this bill, Mr. Albro, Popham, or Malone, perhaps the staff would be willing to accept that even though it's late. Mr. Albro, you are the primary proponent. You can testify for up to 5 minutes. You may begin. Welcome to EHE.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Pinsky, Vice Chair Kagan, Senator Jennings, and members of the committee. My name is Tom Albro, and I serve as the chairman of the Maryland Defense Research Coalition. I'm also a past president of the Army Alliance. The Maryland Defense Research Coalition was established to promote the language change proposed in Senate Bill 889. I would like to thank each of you for the opportunity to present the bill and thank Senator Jennings for his sponsorship of the bill. I would like to recognize two other individuals that we have here today, Mr. Bryson Popham, the Maryland Defense Research Coalition's legislative advisor, and Mr. Robert Malone, who represents the Development Command's Chemical Biological Center, CBC. Okay, Mr. Popham will provide testimony following me. Mr. Malone will not provide testimony, but will answer technical questions the committee may have with respect to the bill. I will strongly encourage the committee to ask questions at the conclusion of the presentation. I would also share that the coalition has briefed members of the Maryland congressional delegation and received a positive response. We are requesting letters of support from them as well. To begin, I feel it's important to set the stage for the reason we're here today. The law that we are seeking to have modified was established in 1993. At that time, the U.S. Army was studying technologies to destroy its stockpile of chemical materials at 8 sites across the United States, one of which was Aberdeen Proving Ground. Aberdeen Proving Ground, or APG, ultimately used a neutralization technology due in large part to the current Maryland law. The destruction of the APG stockpile was completed in February of 2006 with 1,472 metric tons of chemical agent mustard or mustard gas being safely destroyed. The Maryland law we are discussing prohibited the Army from using incineration to destroy that stockpile. Those statutes have now created an unanticipated result of adversely impacting the Department of Defense's ability to study new technologies to manage, control, and destroy chemical warfare materials. The Development Command's Chemical Biological Center, or CBC, located at APG, is the Department of Defense's and the nation's preeminent chemical and biological research and development center. One of its many missions is to investigate new thermal treatment technologies, which current Maryland law constrains. Another unique attribute of CBC is it's the only facility in the United States where chemical compounds defined by the Chemical Weapons Convention can be produced in large amounts, or I should say greater amounts greater than 100 milliliters per year. APG is therefore the only location where, within the US, research, development, and demonstrations of chemical agent treatments to include thermal treatment can occur. Technological advances over the last 30 years require the creation and destruction of small amounts of hazardous materials in order to research, develop, and demonstrate these new technologies. The current law was designed to address the destruction of large quantities of mustard agent. Today, the state of Maryland needs to update its law that will provide sufficient environmental safeguards while permitting CBC to carry out its mission of investigating new thermal treatment technologies. CBC has a long and collaborative relationship working with the Maryland Department of the Environment. Together, they worked to allow CBC to successfully execute the mission while protecting both the environment and its local citizens. MDE and CBC have partnered on the development of numerous technologies to include the system used to destroy 600 tons of Syrian chemical warfare material, as previously mentioned. We know that CBC has consulted with MDE over the past year to address the constraints imposed by the current Maryland law when it comes to demonstrating new thermal treatment technologies. The Senate bill would allow the CBC to present MDA with scientifically defensible quantities of agent that would be necessary to demonstrate a technology's effectiveness. MDE would interrogate that quantity and either accept it or reject it as allowed under CBC's permit applications. Passing this bill would allow a modest increase in the amount of chemical agent CBC could use for those thermal treatment investigations. With MDE oversight, CBC will continue executing its mission safely and with the requirements established by the Maryland state law. In summary, current Maryland law is written to constrain the operation of an incinerator over an extended period of time, processing large quantities of chemical warfare material. Unfortunately, those same operating constraints are currently applied affect research, development, and demonstration activities, even though these activities would be conducted in a setting with engineering controls to capture and treat the emissions from the technologies under evaluation. These constraints stifle development of more efficient, more effective thermal treatment technologies. For these reasons, we encourage a favorable report for Senate Bill 889. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albro. And I wanted to mention that your testimony is in the folder. You're on the list as oral only, but I did just find your written testimony. So thank you for that. The next witness is Bryson Popham, representing the Army Alliance. Welcome, Mr. Popham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, Bryson Popham appearing before you today for the Army Alliance in support of Senate Bill 889 with an amendment. I will correct my colleague who represented that I was here for the Maryland Defense Research Council. We are part of the creation of that organization, of which he is the chair. He is also the former president of the Army Alliance. But while I have appeared before your committee many times, Madam Chair, I have never done so on behalf of this particular client. I have appeared before the Army Alliance in front of B&T on tax and economic development issues, but I can't think of a more important subject for your committee and this General Assembly to consider. With me and appearing at my request are both Mr. Albro, from whom you have already heard, and Mr. Rob Malone. Mr. Malone is with the U.S. Army Futures Command. He is here today, Madam Chair, for the sole purpose of answering your questions. I encourage and invite committee members to ask those questions. This is a subject few of us know much about. I think our sponsor, whom I will also thank, Senator Jennings, knows a lot more about it than any of us do, but the rest of us are learning. I know I am. So I encourage you to take advantage of Mr. Malone's experience and expertise. As I said, I can't think of a more important subject that could be before you. Why is that? Because the mission of the Chemical Biological Center at APG, and as the sponsor told you, it is part of APG, the worldwide Center for Research and Development for the United States Army. Their mission is to protect our armed forces overseas. They have to constantly evaluate the threats in the form of new and creative weapons that our adversaries have. That is what they do. The law, the reason for the bill, quite simply, is that the law in Maryland today was structured for the destruction of large quantities of chemical agents decades ago that were used in the last century. That is no longer the case today. The quantities are far fewer, far lower, and that is really what this legislation is directed toward. The CBC has worked hand in hand with our own Maryland Department of the Environment. The committee has in the file letters from both MDE and the Department of Commerce, and while both are letters of information, I think if you read them, you'll see that they are positive.
Mr. Popham, I need you to wrap up. Your time has expired.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In closing, members of the committee, I hope you will give this bill your very serious consideration. In my opinion, it is essential for our national defense. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Popham. Appreciate your expertise in helping to get the right witnesses here. So it sounds like Mr. Malone is not going to add his testimony, but is sitting here if there are questions. At this moment, I see no hands raised from colleagues. We just got a hand raised. All right, Senator Lamb, let's have a question for Mr. Malone or one of the others. Thank you. You'll need to unmute.
Sure. Thanks, Madam Vice Chair. Apologize. I was just hopping over from another hearing. So, and maybe I missed this, but is the gist of this bill to allow chemical weapons to be incinerated in the state? Did I just, and maybe I just missed something in this bill, but it seems like that's the gist of this bill, right? There were a lot of acronyms and other provisions that were kind of cited here, but it seems like just in a quick review of the bill that there was, I guess, some motivation in the past to put in the statute to limit the incineration of chemical weapons in the state at any state facility, I guess, located in the state. And so it looks like this really rescinds that, and just trying to understand what the implications are for, other locations in the state too.
Could we ask our expert, Mr. Malone, to take a stab at that, Madam Chair?
Yeah, and so what this bill allows us to do is to, before we put technologies and hand them over to the warfighter or deploy them overseas for operation, those technologies have to be demonstrated. We have to prove to ourselves that they can be operated and will work safely, effectively, and protective of the environment. And so what this allows us to do is basically evaluate all technologies. We're not selectively going after incineration, but each type of chemical agent that's out there and the configuration or the weapon it's contained in requires a tailored solution. For instance, Syria had specific agents and types that were stored in bulk containers that allowed us to use neutralization as a means to destroy. And in 2013, 2014, we developed that technology, proved it out at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and then deployed it overseas to be operated on a ship off the coast of Syria. When we deal with what we assume some of our other adversaries have, which include large quantities of diverse stockpiles of weaponized chemical agents, in other words, chemical agents stored in bombs and projectiles and rockets, we need technical solutions that offer greater flexibility to get the job done safely and effectively, and high temperature treatment found in technologies that are currently defined as incineration by the Code of Maryland regulation would in some cases offer the best solution available, the safest solution available for use in these tactical and austere environments.
But these are
in no way, shape, or form are we
right?
looking at bringing chemical agent to Maryland. We are looking at demonstrating the technologies that we would use in these tactical environments.
Yeah, and I understand that. And these are tests, it seems like. I'm just not sure I'm comfortable. I mean, Aberdeen is not in an unpopulated area. This is not like Yucca Mountain out in Nevada. It's a fairly populated area in northeast Baltimore, or northeast Maryland. And so, I'm just concerned that, these are tests that are being run. We don't know the full implications nor what the results could lead to. And, even though they're in small quantities, you don't need very much VX gas to be or sarin to be deadly, right? And these are going to be experimental kind of chemicals that are going to be, I guess, incinerated. Maybe this is like the anti-NIMBY attitude to things, but why here? Like, why not send it to somewhere else to get incinerated?
Madam Chair, can I, Senator, beginning of my testimony.
But let me just be clear. We don't want to get into a policy debate because that's what the committee will do when we vote. But let's definitely exchange information.
Sure.
So please go ahead.
Senator, beginning of my testimony, what I explained was Aberdeen Proving Grounds been around since 1917, and about 40 years ago, we realized that we had hundreds of tons of mustard gas located there, as well as other facilities. The United States Army realized that. They needed a place to destroy it. Aberdeen Proving Ground was the facility. We have destroyed hundreds of tons of chemical warfare up there. And the legislature had come in back then in the 70s or 80s and developed regulations on how we would do it. And that was strictly for disposal of this chemical warfare, which we've done already. We're transitioning now that we've disposed of all of it. We still have to do the R&D side of the current threats that are out there. And, look, I live within 5 miles of Edgewood Arsenal. This stuff is, I can hear the booms when they're shooting off the tanks. And, if it's going to affect anybody, it's going to affect me and my family. But this is what the military does. They do an incredible job of it, just like Fort Detrick. Think of all the biological diseases that they're dealing with up there. They do it in a very closed, strict environment. And, that's what they're doing here. So what I'm trying to say is we have been doing this. This isn't something new we're trying to do. We're pivoting from doing hundreds of tons to small, based on poundage for R&D purposes.
Within engineering controls and secondary containment. So this is
different in that, what they're doing at Fort Detrick is still obviously within the bounds of state law. You're asking for a change in state law to actually allow this to happen.
Madam Chair, may I?
Okay, so I think that was a statement. Let's go. Senator Washington had a question, and then we have an opposing witness. Senator Washington.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Senator. I just want to understand the bill. So it's written to the environment article. And on page 2, on the first line, it's section C, there's a deletion. Because again, it sort of affirms, as you said, that the state of Maryland initially, I'm going back to the first section A, that chemical warfare is designed for the destruction of human beings and for no legitimate civilian industrial use, and that the state does recognize that they need to dispose of this chemical welfare materials. But then C starts, and this is where where the bill starts to change law. It deletes, since these chemical warfare materials are highly toxic or carcinogenic. So why is that? And then you go on, except as provided. Are the materials no longer carcinogenic or toxic? And I'm just wondering about that deletion of that part of the law. If I could understand.
Is that directed to Senator Jennings?
I don't know who can answer it. So Senator Jennings or?
I would have to defer to either Mr. Malone.
Mr. Malone, why don't you unmute?
Or Bryson might have the legal side.
Mr. Malone would be the correct.
Okay, Mr. Malone?
Yeah, and so really the only change that we're looking to affect, because to answer your question directly, Senator, that has not changed. The only thing we're really looking to change is to allow us to demonstrate technologies that are promising and get them in the hands of the warfighters or the DoD civilians that may have to use them at some point in time in the future overseas. And so, no, in no way, shape, or form have these compounds now magically become non-carcinogenic. They're still carcinogenic. They're still very toxic. But we have the expertise and the safeguards in place at Edgewood to do this effectively, as Mr. Albro said. These efforts, these tests happen in environmental enclosures, in test chambers that have multiple layers of protection built onto them, to include carbon filtration that protects all the any air releases, spill prevention measures, and all of that goes to and is approved by the state of Maryland prior to us being allowed to do this work. And so none of this precludes the state of Maryland's permitting process. It just, right now, it doesn't afford them any ability to permit.
Chairwoman, I'm just trying to understand, as drafted, you should know, I don't know if you didn't read the bill or if you didn't draft it, but this just leads to, I know this is, I'm not having a policy discussion. I'm trying to understand the change that does have an impact on the policy, but I want to understand the bill. So the bill, section C, does delete and says, since these chemical warfare materials are highly toxic or carcinogenic, that is deleted. And then it goes on to say, except in this, then there's a second section. Again, I'm trying to understand the bill from the sponsor's perspective. The section 7.239.3, that's when you define what a research facility is. And then you say this section doesn't apply to incineration or chemical warfare materials at the research facility. So if there's a lot of what I'm hearing, again, these very knowledgeable people talking about testing of products and testing of, instruments of war. Forgive me, I don't know exact terminology, but none of that is in the bill. The only thing that really seems to be in the bill is saying that these materials are no longer toxic or carcinogenic, and then allowing there to undo the bill, to undo the intent of the legislation. So I'm just, is that what I'm reading, or is that?
Madam Chair, may I respond to Senator Washington?
Thank you, Mr. Popham. Briefly.
Thank you.
So let me just, sorry, colleagues, we have an opponent. We have, we have another couple of questions. We have 3 more bills, and then we have the cybersecurity task force. And so
I guess I might be sounding rhetorical at this point. I can take my answer off and listen and welcome. I'm happy to talk afterward, but I'm
okay. But Senator Washington, if your question's about the bill, so we want to make sure that you and everyone understands what the bill proposes to do.
Okay, great.
Mr. Popham, if you could just answer briefly, that would be great. And then
Senator Washington, I would direct you to line 14, or I think it's line 14, but the language that says research, development, or demonstration purposes.
Yes.
your question, Senator Lamb's question earlier, that is the key difference in the bill. When this law was created back in 1993, it was for the destruction of large quantities of chemical agents, mustard gas. What's happened today is they are much, much, much smaller quantities, and they are limited. That's the limiting language there. Research, development, and or demonstration purposes. And that is the big change in the bill. And Mr. Malone, I hope that's accurate. That's my understanding of the purpose of the bill.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Washington. Thank you, Mr. Popham. Senator Carozza, do you think you and I could hold our questions until after we hear from the one opposing witness, or do you want to ask yours now?
Well, if Senator Jennings can stay, if not, I could ask the question.
Senator Jennings, can you stick around just for a
Senator?
minute? There's only
I got
one.
another bill before you.
I know, that's right. That's true. We got you hostage here. Okay, so Senator Carozza, if you're okay with that, let's hear from just the one opponent so that we have both sides in front of us, and then you and I can both ask our questions. The next witness is with Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility, Dr. Gwen Dubois. Thank you so much. Welcome, and you may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility, or CPSR, is the state partner of the National Physicians for Social Responsibility. And we're a 700E activist, physicians, health professionals, and other supporters that rely on evidence-based public health policy regarding prevention of nuclear war and strategies to mitigate climate crisis and toxic pollution, all through the lens of racial equity and social justice. We strongly oppose SB 899. There were demonstrations against incineration of chemical weapons in the 70s and 90s because of public safety concerns about incinerating toxic carcinogenic material close to populated areas, 30 miles from Baltimore, 14 miles from Haverty Grace, and across the bay from Chestertown. So the DoD approved an alternative called chemical neutralization, no smokestacks putting particles into the air. Edgewood Arsenal successfully completed neutralization of its mustard gas. So successful and brilliant were the scientists there that they received international fame using neutralization to rid the world of Syria's deadly sarin gas that we heard about. Its excellent chemical engineers developed breakthroughs with neutralization technology to rid the world of some of its deadliest chemical weapons without incineration. Why would we pave the way for resuming incineration of research chemical weapons and exempt them from safety procedures the public has fought for, like looking first for safer alternatives, putting in place emergency preparedness plans created with public input, and demonstrating compliance with state toxic air pollution standards? We need to know what is behind this effort to weaken safety standards for incinerating chemical waste that the public previously said it didn't want and the Department of Defense said they didn't need. What necessitates this proposed change from existing law? And which research facilities would this amendment be reliant on? Well, we know it's the Aberdeen Improvement Ground. And is there a new incinerator or just using the old one? And what chemical weapons do they plan to burn? Are these carcinogens, dioxins, heavy metals? Has there been evaluation of non-incineration options like neutralization, which achieves so much without incineration? Incineration is last century. Why would we be doing this? This bill lacks transparency. In fact, it is dangerously opaque to public trust and to public health. CPSR vigorously opposes SB 899.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dubois. We're glad that you're here. Senator Carozza, you may ask your questions of proponents or the opponent. Please go.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I was going to ask Senator Jennings. He had mentioned it briefly in his testimony, but I was trying to better understand, and I haven't read it line for line, so I was really just looking for a good clarification. MDE sent in a pretty detailed letter. Senator Jennings, I didn't know if you had an opportunity to look at it, but you did mention the amendments that they proposed. Was just trying to understand your review of the amendments and then the posture as far as MDE after those amendments.
Well, I think they were clarifying, but I'm going to have to, if you don't mind, ask Bryson if he wouldn't mind stepping up and answering with regards to the amendments, because I think he's been working with MDE and their concerns with the original bill.
Okay. Mr. Popham or Mr. Malone?
Yeah, I have to pass this off to Mr. Malone. You
Okay.
can
All right.
Mr. Malone, you're on the hot seat.
Yeah, no problem. And I should start by saying we totally support the amendments as presented by MDE. The way the language was originally written and crafted, it basically exempted research and development facilities. That, as I said, that is not our intent. Our intent is that we would be allowed to do this at research, development, and demonstration facilities that are actually performing research, development, and demonstration. We're not looking to do this as a regular or cyclical basis. We're looking to do this when and as needed as the technology and the problem sets we must face overseas require. So these are as one of the scientists who was involved heavily, I believe the word brilliant scientist was used earlier, involved in both developing the neutralization systems run at Aberdeen as well as the neutralization systems used in Syria. Incineration is never our first solution that we go to. But quite simply, by not going this route, we run the risk of not putting the best available and safest technology in the hands of the warfighters.
No, I understand that, but bottom line is you're accepting MDE amendments, and as I understand it, if you do accept them, that would alleviate the concerns they raised earlier in their correspondence with you. So that's, I just want to clarify, you were accepting them.
Absolutely, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Carrozza. My question, colleagues, was actually following up a little bit on what Senator Lamb was talking about earlier, which was related to the fact that this is in a populous area. And I wonder, I'm going to start with Mr. Malone rather than going to you last. What sort of, and then Dr. Dubois mentioned it briefly, what sort of consumer publicity, information, community information and outreach would there be prior to a burn? And have you worked at all with Ross Coates and any of the 911 folks in terms of what happens if there's a problem, a leak, a something, and would they be prepared to mitigate and address the situation?
Without a doubt. And so what research, development, and demonstrations are, they're a permitted effort by Maryland Department of Environment. And so we would submit an application to the state of Maryland. We would hold public meetings and public information sessions, all very similar to the normal hazardous waste permitting process. But these research, development, and demonstration permits are for very short, finite efforts. And so, yes, all of that would happen. We would work with our local and then county level emergency response folks. We have support agreements in place, and those are all exercised, and those notifications are made before any of these efforts happen.
Thank you, Mr. Malone. We appreciate your testimony and your answers. Oh, Senator Gallion has a question, and hopefully that will wrap up this bill. Senator Gallion, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So my question kind of piggybacks on the Vice Chair's recent question. I actually live close enough to hear the booms. I have an Aberdeen zip code. So I noticed that the U.S. Army Test Center just put out a notice. I saw it on the Baltimore Sun's website about controlled burns at Aberdeen Proving Ground going on this week. This was just an article from yesterday. So I'm assuming that's similar type of thing that would be posted. I mean, it's pretty well advertised, looks like. Is that correct?
So we actually, it's more than just public notice, because the control burns you're talking about are for fire control, obviously. Right. So there is a formal process under the hazardous waste regulations. We just went through this with a technology that we're going to be doing testing on next year. It's a non-incineration technology that basically shatters munitions. We held a public meeting last September on this technology, informed the public about what we're testing, how the technology works, how we're dealing with emergency response, the quantities of materials we'll feed through it, and solicited their input and feedback, and MDE will consider that before they issue the permit.
Right. And one other point that I'd like you to address, we've heard about this being in a populated area, but living close to there, I know it's not the easiest to get on those places. There's a lot of security. It's kind of almost like its own little city, I guess, that whole area. And I know for years, there was the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute had their training facility on the Aberdeen portion. They've since moved it to Edgewood, where you don't have to go through quite the, the check-in points and so forth. So I just wanted to get that out there, the committee, that it's not like this is in the middle of a town or anything. It's a very secure location. Isn't that so, Mr. Malone?
Yes, our test ranges are actually out on the end of our peninsula, is as remote as it can get from the population centers that are the towns of Edgewood and Aberdeen that are closest to us.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Thank you, Senator Gallion. Okay, so I think we may need to do some additional follow-up. Mr. Popham, maybe if you can make sure that we know how to connect with Mr. Malone, since we don't have written testimony, or we could do it through you. You can just follow up with counsel. And that completes the hearing on Senate Bill 889. Thank you all. And thank you. Senator Lamb, because you're on the committee and because Senator Jennings is here, I'd like to take the next Jennings bill, if you would, and then we'll go to your bill. Is that all right?
Yep, no problem.
Perfect. All right, Senator Jennings, Senate Bill 924, Procurement, Information Technology, Cloud-Based Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. Following you will be former council member Christopher Murden as the lead proponent, and then John Fiastro. So Senator Jennings, you may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Senator Jennings for Senate Bill 924. It's a pretty simple bill. It's about technology. And let's talk about the technology that we currently use, which pretty much everybody on this screen is probably using a laptop or a desktop that it has a hard drive inside of it, and everything you do is on that computer. If you take your computer home tonight and forget to bring it back in the morning, you're pretty much out of luck tomorrow trying to get work done. We're trying to change that. Technology has changed. The world has changed. And I'll give you an example. In the United States military, they use virtual desktops. As long as you're on that base and you use the same server, no matter what computer you go to and log into, your credentials, all your information is there. And that's what we're trying to do, is bring the state into the 21st century with regards to how the world is going with regards to technology, with virtual cloud-based desktops. You have to realize you would have a server that would host all the information, and you have your actual devices, and it just uses your information, and everything is there. It's very beneficial in numerous ways. One, you as an employee get to use, computer to computer. Two, the IT department can guarantee and make sure that all the computers are up to par with regards to the antivirus software and everything, because everything is connected. They're working with it. It's an incredible cost-saving benefit to the state. I'll give you a quick example. I think it was in 2021's budget, on September 9th, to a response from the 2020 chairman's report, the 2021 budget, DeWitt published what it would cost in savings. And it said that an estimated average monthly PC lifecycle cost per end user device under our current structure, what we use, individual computers, is roughly $21.26 a month. If we were to go to more of a virtual based system, which don't get me wrong, you're still using a laptop like this, you're still using a desktop, but when it comes to the actual servers and everything, it's all cloud based. That same cost drops down to $16.45 a month, which is 12,000 end users, or what Department of Information Technology, I think, touch. That's almost a $700,000 savings per year. This is where technology is going. This is how life is in the main world now. Most businesses are moving this way. They call it thin clients with regards to the computers that they're using. And I just think that the state of Maryland should go that way. This bill kind of pushes us that way. It's the technology, or the term you'll hear is devices service. There is an amendment, which I think John Fiastro could talk about, which brings that into the procurement side of this. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I can answer questions if you want, or we can go into the panelists, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Senator Jennings. Let's hear from your panelists. There is no opposition that has signed up to testify. So Christopher Murden, nice to see you. Welcome to EHE. You have up to 5 minutes as the lead proponent.
Great, thank you very much, and appreciate the committee's indulgence in hearing my testimony. My name is Chris Murden. I'm the president of NTT Data's State and Local Government Division. As was mentioned, I'm also a former Howard County Council member and former Howard County Chief Information Officer. Just as a matter of background, NTT Data is a very large, it's a top 10 systems integrator in the world, and we have IT contracts in 42 states. So I bring a lot of knowledge of what other state governments are doing. With regard to this particular piece of legislation, I really categorize this as a good government bill. Right? It really focuses government on ensuring that the workforce can be mobilized, and we all experienced that today, but particularly a year ago when we were all tied to offices, tied to PCs, and really weren't able to quickly move to a remote environment. I'll point to the specifically to the Department of Labor when unemployment spiked, and the Department of Labor really was tied to a mainframe in their facility, and they couldn't quickly mobilize to start taking unemployment applications remotely. So we really need to focus on modernizing the way that IT is delivered in state governments. What's being proposed today, along with the amendment, is already being done in many, many other states. I'll point to our neighboring Virginia, already does what's called device as a service statewide, state of Georgia, state of Oklahoma, and Texas. NTT Data happens to be the provider for Oklahoma and Georgia. Their workforce is approximately about 40,000 users in each of those states. So in addition to sort of mobilizing the workforce, of utmost concern certainly is device safety, and both with a virtual desktop environment as well as sort of the device as a service, which is part of the amendment, really brings in a lot of technology and industry expertise to harden the environment, if you will. Ransomware, if you've probably heard of that, is where somebody can enter into your network and grab hold of your servers and your laptop devices and basically hold you ransom until you pay to have those relieved. So this directly affects somebody's ability to do that. The thing that states often struggle with are when new employees join state government, the time to deploy a device is extremely long. We just working with the state of Oklahoma, it took them 50 days. So when a new employee came on, it took them 50 days to be able to get that employee a device. We're able to work through this process through their legislation, which is what this legislation is mirrored of, to get them down to 6 days. I know Maryland struggles with that as well. Maryland isn't alone. Every state struggles with it. So we want to make sure that the workforce is as productive as possible. The other thing that happens is you have these sort of haves and have-not departments. So some departments are very well funded, others aren't as well funded. The ones that aren't as well funded tend to hold on to their devices longer because they don't have the money to buy new devices. So the longer you hold on to those devices, the more issues that arise. One, from a security perspective, they have outdated software, don't have the latest patches, but also these break. And now your workforce is not productive because they don't have a device to work with. It's a very cost-effective solution, as Senator Jennings mentioned before. It really moves from sort of the capital world where you have to, fund a bunch of PCs or laptop devices through the capital budget. Really makes it an operating budget. We can kind of go into that if there are questions. And then the final area, which is a significant benefit, really is the tracking of assets. Often what happens is if an employee leaves the government, sometimes their device will end up in the bottom drawer of a desk, be on the top shelf. Not only is that a security concern, but also a waste of taxpayers' dollars. So there's a lot there. In 5 minutes, it's very difficult to kind of explain all of the benefits, but I'd probably provide you enough highlights to show what the benefits of the legislation are. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Murden, and your timing was good. Mr. Fiastro, you are going to be one of the poster children for the mysteries of wearing masks, because I didn't know, for as many times as I've seen you, I did not know that you now grew hair on your top lip. So welcome to EHE. You have up to 2.5 minutes. You may begin.
Madam Vice Chair, I'm going to assume by your comment that you're a supporter of the mustache. My wife does not support it. So I'm going to tell her, look, look, if senators like it, I got to keep it. You know?
I think we'll debate it in a voting session, Mr. Fiasco.
No. Just make a vice chair decision here. Don't let it up for a vote, okay? Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair, for the time today. For the record, my name is John Fiastro here on behalf of NTT Data. I just want to hit on a few things that Mr. Murden mentioned about tighter inventory. You know, as some of you might know, I was a former state employee in both the legislative branch and the executive branch. And you know, during my time in the executive branch, inventory of hardware was something that I was always a little surprised at. Laptops were kind of kept in a closet. Old cell phones were tablets might have been kept in a cardboard box. And when a new employee came on, it might have taken quite a while to actually get that device into their hands. If you wanted a cell phone, you said so, and an admin would, you know, get your cell phone all set up. So that always struck me as a little odd. This legislation with the amendment is offered by Senator Jennings, and I'll talk about the amendment in a second, actually tightens that inventory, puts it in the hands of a vendor, and makes sure that all pieces are actually in circulation at any one given time. So rather than having a stockpile of hardware in an administrative cabinet or in a cardboard box, as the case might be, you'll actually have it managed by the vendor. The second piece and the second benefit of that, in combination with virtual desktop infrastructure as a piece, is that you actually, as Mr. Bergen mentioned, actually can online a new employee more quickly. There was nothing more disappointing working in a state agency than bringing on a new hire and having them sit there for basically a week or two until they were given the proper hardware, as well as their email address, online credential, everything that they would actually need to do in order to do their job. So what this bill would do is actually streamline that and actually make that a lot more efficient. Madam Vice Chair, I'm going to hit briefly on the amendment, and then the amendment actually expands the bill to include beyond virtual desktop infrastructure.
You have 26 seconds, Mr. Fiastro, so go fast.
Virtual desktop infrastructure to include, in addition, device as a service. It includes device as a service as a definition, and then there are several other mentions of device as a service within the amendment. This is only to say that there is an inherent value of not just having one, but both. In combination, you can extract more value by having the desktop infrastructure piece along with the device as a service piece. So thank you. I appreciate the time, and I would ask the committee to vote the bill favorable with amendments. With the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiastro. Thank you, Senator Jennings, for the bill. And colleagues, the amendment is available online. It's in our folders, so we can look into that and have counsel teach us more about that. I see no hands raised, so I think we will call this bill hearing complete. So thank you, Senator Jennings, for Senate Bill 924. Mr. Murd, Mr. Fiastro, stay safe. We'll have to get an update. Thank you very much.
I do want to point out Senator Frey is a co-sponsor and worked very hard on this bill also, so I appreciate all her help.
Senator Hester.
Senator Jennings, you're so sweet. It's a good bill, very good bill.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Senator Hester, for that endorsement. Senator Lamb, you are up next if you're here and ready to go, or we can take Senator Elfreth if she's here.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm happy to go next.
Okay, perfect. Senator Bill 829, Emergency and Expedited Procurements Reform. Senator Lamb's going to kick us off, followed by Michael Powell, Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. And I think our colleagues know this, but people watching at home may not know that Senator Lamb has done extraordinary oversight as chair throughout some of these scandals. So thank you, Senator Lamb, for your leadership on this.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Lamar, if you could bring up the slides for that'd be great. And happy to have Mr. Powell join me. He's here for informational purposes. He obviously is with DLS. So for the record, Clarence Lamb, Senator District 12, here to present Senate Bill 829, which really has the aim of clarifying the purpose of emergency procurement, increasing the accountability and transparency over some of the emergency procurement spending that's been going on. And as you know, and you've seen from the last year, there's been a lot that's been expended, but we actually have historical data going back the last few years too, to kind of shed light on the need for greater reforms and oversight here. As you probably also know, I chair the Joint Committee on Audits and Evaluation. The next slide. Most of you are familiar with the general process of procurement, which involves several steps which seek to ensure competition and quality in procurement in order to ensure that taxpayer funds are wisely spent. The state has two accelerated methods for procurement that allow departments to bypass many of the steps in the procurement process. The first is emergency procurement, so kind of the standard emergency procurement that most of us are probably familiar with, but the details are as follows. So in the EP, or emergency procurement, it seeks to address any sudden or unexpected circumstances to mitigate threats posed to public health, safety, or welfare by bypassing almost all of the controls in the normal procurement process. There is no cap on the amount of money that's allowed to be dispersed by emergency procurement, and the process only requires that the procurement officers receive approval from their respective department secretary. Agencies must post the details of these contracts on the eMaryland Marketplace website within 30 days and provide a justification report to the Board of Public Works within 45 days. But by that point, most of the money is often already spent, and those are regulations that BPW has put in place. There's also something called expedited procurement, which is different than emergency procurement. So expedited procurement is similar, but the primary difference here is that the method requires the Board of Public Works to have approval before the money is actually spent, which allows for at least some degree of oversight. Currently, the expedited procurement is only available to the Maryland Ports Commission and the Maryland Aviation Administration. In both cases, there is no requirement to obtain competition in the bidding solicitation process beyond what is reasonably possible at that time. Next slide. Emergency spending during the early months of the pandemic highlighted some of the concerns in our current emergency procurement law, which I'll speak to in just a few moments, but it's not limited to just pandemic spending. The emergency procurement process has nearly no guardrails in place because there's a lot of leeway given. The emergency contracts can be quite large payments with no upper dollar limit, often millions and millions of dollars. I understand there are times when that a complete bidding process just can't be done because of circumstances, but the purpose of the bidding process is to help ensure and preserve state resources through competition while ensuring that the state goals to meeting certain minority business enterprises are also met to the extent possible. Therefore, the goal should be to try to have as much competition, all the procurements to the degree that that is possible. So I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with the contracts awarded to Blue Flame and also to Lab Genomics, which raised serious concerns at the onset of the pandemic. In the case of Blue Flame, the state spent $6 million for a company who had only been open for a few days based on the promise to deliver ventilators and masks and other types of PPE. The company unfortunately failed to deliver on the contract, and the state ultimately ended up with less than half the ventilators promised, and the delivery of masks was significantly delayed. In the case of Lab Genomics, the state paid a South Korean company for COVID lab test kits that ended up not being usable and had to be swapped by the state at a higher cost. Although there were serious needs early on in the pandemic, I do have some concerns that at least having a little more oversight of these processes would have ideally prevented these two incidents from occurring. While these two contracts received a lot of public attention, they comprised just 10% of the emergency procurements that totaled over $200 million last year. The Board of Public Works agenda that presented this package contained multiple line items with millions in purchases that were accepted with little justification and supporting documentation. It's not to suggest that there's any malfeasance on the part of the board or units of state government that were placed in tough positions back in, about this time last year. But I wanted to raise this point to emphasize that the front end oversight needs to be strengthened, because once the Board of Public Works is made aware of these purchases, it can be up to 45 days later. It's oftentimes too late to make alterations or to rescind these contracts. So next slide. As a result of some of these purchases, an evaluation was requested by our chairperson, Chairman Pinsky, and the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability that Mr. Powell directs conducted a 7-year look back of emergency procurement and illustrated that these issues existed far before the pandemic brought them into the public eye. I'll allow Mr. Powell to speak after myself about the details of his evaluation's findings, but would like to point out some of the key points that warrant the committee's attention and why we're bringing forward this bill. The vast majority of emergency procurement uses since 2013, so this is in the last 8 years, were unrelated to wider state emergency, and 56% of these contracts were awarded with a single bidder. As you can see from the slide here, Mr. Powell's office also found that the minority business enterprises were significantly underrepresented in the award of emergency contracts. Because the Board of Public Works receives justification for these emergency payments after the fact, they're not in the best position to be able to provide timely oversight of the contracts and negotiations on the front end where it's most effective. 99% of the emergency procurement contracts were approved by BPW. BPW is not typically able to halt contracts that have been finalized or to claw back funds from contracts that have already been dispersed. They are able to remand procurements back to the agency for origin for further clarification, but that process doesn't provide sufficient oversight capabilities at this stage to safeguard our state funds. And just to be clear, when the board reviews this, 99% of these emergency procurements are accepted by the Board of Public Works with most of the time without even any discussion. Next slide. So in the effort to address these concerns, this bill's primary purpose is to enhance the front end oversight over emergency procurement. The bill is not an attempt to prevent the ability of state units to provide a timely response to emergencies, but to clarify the purposes of these methods of accelerated procurement and promote proactive methods that would reduce the need for these emergency purposes. The bill begins to address these concerns by first clarifying the definition and purpose of the word emergency as it relates to procurement. The bill also adds additional clarification to the definition of an emergency to describe an event that is, quote, immediate or, quote, serious, which requires quick response that would otherwise present threats to public health. The bill also expands access to the expedited procurement method, so that other method that's only available currently to the Maryland Ports Commission and Maryland Aviation Administration, and expands this to all state agencies. This method allows for a middle ground, kind of a central point between the emergency procurement, which has very few guardrails, and the normal procurement process, and that allows departments to avoid several of the procurement steps, but ultimately still requires Board of Public Works approval. It also includes language that for emergency procurements that exceed $50,000, reasonable attempts must be made to secure at least 3 oral bids for a proposed contract. This provides for BPW approval of emergency contracts that also exceed $1 million. It also requires justification to the board within 15 days rather than 45 days, and mandates that a consolidated procurement report be submitted to the General Assembly on an annual basis. Next slide. So I want to thank various members of the stakeholder groups who provide their testimony and for their collaboration on this bill. I want to stress that it was in part motivated to be able to look at what happened during the early parts of the pandemic about this time last year. But as the chairman has identified too and has requested BLS to look into, there are subsequent findings that pertain to emergency procurement that extend beyond just the pandemic. And I want to thank Mr. Powell and his office for their diligence in preparing the evaluation, which provided valuable insight and kind of served as the founding basis for these recommendations. The bill's intention really is to affirm the Board of Public Works' role as the primary oversight entity for these emergency state procurements and also preserve state resources. We have received 2 letters of support from the state treasurer, from Nancy Kopp, as well as the comptroller's office and Peter Francho. As a result of the stakeholder conversations we've proposed an amendment that addresses the feasibility concerns brought to our attention regarding the difficulties of asking the board to meet as often as this bill might require. So we're trying to accommodate the board's concerns. The amendment would only require the Board of Public Works to have a hearing if a contract included $1 million or more being dispersed prior to services rendered, otherwise, unless otherwise waived by the Board of Public Works. Emergency contracts that do not disperse more than $1 million before services are rendered do not require BPW hearing unless requested by the board itself. Some of the affected departments that you see testimony from still have concerns about the requirement to consult the chief procurement officer. Happy to work on language that could create possible escape valves or release valves, but wanted to point out that per Mr. Powell's evaluation, the vast majority of these emergency procurements are made more than 2 days after the alleged emergency occurs. The provisions in the bill only require that they notify the chief procurement officer within 2 days. And the bill does currently have a fiscal note, but I wanted to, in closing, point out that we suspect the state will save more money by injecting more competition into the procurement process. Additionally, the fiscal note seems to assume that there will be the same number of emergency procurements from departments like DGS, Department of Public Safety, and MDOT as we currently do. However, we don't think that that's necessarily the case. One big thing that we hope that comes out of this bill is that the departments will move towards more proactive planning in order to avoid emergency procurements. I think all of us don't want to have as many emergency procurements as possible. The university system, for example, had no emergency procurements during the evaluation period except for one COVID procurement, even though, just like DGS and public safety, they're responsible for running and maintaining many buildings across the state. So I'm happy to take any questions and urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 829. Happy to turn over to Mr. Powell for his presentation.
Senator Lamb, thank you for a really excellent presentation on a vitally important fiscal issue. Let's hear from Mr. Powell and then take questions. Mr. Powell, you have up to 5 minutes. Thank you very much for coming to Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me. My name is Mike Powell. I'm the director of the relatively new Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability in the Department of Legislative Services. I had some amazing remarks written, and then Senator Lamb basically covered everything I wanted to cover, but just a lot better than I was going to do. So I'll be quicker than maybe I had planned on being. If we could go to actually the third slide. Because Senator Lamb did really clarify the essence of the way emergency procurements work in Maryland right now, which is an agency secretary and their procurement person can together decide to enter into a contract of unlimited amount. And that money is very difficult to, if the BPW is concerned about the way that money was spent, or there's very little they can do about it. In fact, what I'll share, if maybe we can go to the next slide. We did look at 554 emergency procurements that happened over 8 fiscal years. And as Senator Lamb noted, 5 were remanded. Of all of those, there was a somewhat infamous contract to restock vending machines at a highway rest stop in Western Maryland. The BPW understandably remanded this contract back to the agency. The agency rebid the contract through the normal procurement process, and 15 months later, an acceptable contract was awarded. While the emergency contract was in place for over a year, this is the only example we ever saw where state spending was curtailed for an emergency procurement. And I want to be clear, in a lot of cases, it shouldn't be curtailed. It was used for a good reason and some competition was obtained. But only one of the 554 was the BPW ever able to say, we have concerns about the way that contract was done and we'd like to fix it and find a more effective way or efficient way of spending the state's money. On the next slide, Senator Lamb's already covered this very well. Actually, one more if you could. That red line is the state's aspirational goal for MBE participation in all contracts. The blue line represents the actual participation of MBE. So it's the percentage of all state contracting revenue that goes to MBEs. And the yellow bars are that percentage related to emergency procurement. So it seems apparent from this that by using an emergency procurement, they don't have the time or the resources to dedicate to ensuring that MBEs are fully able to participate in that contract, like normal state contracts in the state have to go through. If we could see the next slide. Again, Senator Lamb mentioned this, 56% of procurements only received one bid. And what we learned was that of those 56%, 59 only received one bid because they only solicited one bid. It could be that there was literally only one contractor or vendor that was able to meet that service. Like there are state police helicopters that need maintained, and I don't know this, but it's possible that there's only one helicopter maintenance firm that can actually do that. But again, 59%, only one bid was solicited. The next slide will just briefly show we wanted to show that a number of reasons for doing an emergency procurement happen over and over and over again. And that doesn't mean that the need to do them wasn't urgent, but if you look at the Department of Public Safety, they've done 86 emergency maintenance contracts over the 8 years that we took a look at. It's boilers breaking, it's roofs leaking, it's things like that. Again, it's not that those things aren't urgent, but the BPW members have pointed out numerous times that many of those are driven by deferred maintenance issues. And there may be an interest in trying to come up with some sort of on-call services contract for when things that we should know are going to happen, we're just not exactly when, to plan for when they do happen. Next slide. And I am almost done. We had a number of recommendations, many of which the Department of General Services agreed with, a couple that they didn't. The first one was that there should be some really robust and thorough reporting that goes to the legislature. This is money that the legislature appropriates, and when it's spent with the little oversight that exists, I feel like at a minimum that should be thoroughly reported to the legislature as they make future budget decisions. The second one, Senator Lamb, I think, has incorporated into his bill, but that's simply that the state chief procurement officer pre-approve contracts. In some cases, I understand that would be difficult. I think about 30% of them are actually done within 2 days of someone determining that there's an emergency, but many of them take place more than a week or more than 30 days, or in some cases months. The contract actually happens months after somebody decided there was an emergency. And I believe Pennsylvania and North Carolina are both states that have some kind of pre-approval like that. In both cases, they have the ability, I think, to waive that under certain circumstances, but this is not something that would be unique to Maryland. On the next slide, Senator Lamb has covered this better than I can, but we have suggested modifying and clarifying, frankly, the regulatory definition of an emergency for procurement purposes, expanding the use of expedited procurements, and also to have the Department of General Services work with agencies to try and take a bunch of these needs that require emergency procurements and get them through the normal procurement process. I think I've said procurement enough times today, so I'll stop. Thank you for your time, and I'm available to answer any questions.
We appreciate your testimony, Mr. Powell, and we appreciate the work that you do every day. So thank you for that and helping us make sure that taxpayer money is spent appropriately.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take the prerogative to go first because my hand was up first. So first, Senator Lamb, again, great work on this and on this whole issue. This is so important. So I just have 3 quick questions, and it can be for you or for Mr. Powell or both or something. So
I also see our treasurer here, Nancy Kopp. I assume that's actually her, but yeah, we're happy to take any questions. Go ahead.
Always happy to have our state treasurer here. So first, as I think you know, I was working on procurement related to 911. And so one of the questions, and I talked to Treasurer Kopp, who is here in the room, and Madam Treasurer, if you decide you want to pop in at some point and help answer a question, that'd be fine too. I want to just tell committee members, we do have one more bill, and then the cybersecurity work group is going to meet for an hour and a half after that. So But this is an important bill. So one of the questions is turnaround time. Mr. Powell, you just mentioned it might be weeks or a month or something, and during an emergency. So one of the challenges is, how do you have sufficient oversight without slowing something down in the midst of a crisis, in the midst of an emergency? And I'm wondering, again, Senator Lamb, Treasurer Kopp, Mr. Powell, how you balance that and how this legislation can carefully balance that. Second question, should I ask all three or should I pause after each one? Do you want
We
to write
should
them down?
pause after each one or we may get lost there.
Okay. All right, let's do the first one then, Senator.
Okay.
Or Powell or Madam Treasurer.
Yeah, so I'll speak to the provisions of the bill. I guess yeah, our treasurer could probably speak from personal experience and Mr. Powell can speak from historical experience. The bill itself says that there's a provision in there where these emergency procurements must be approved by the chief procurement officer. They have 48 hours to do so. If they don't respond within that 48 hours, it's assumed that they approve it. And it also has a provision in there to provide some better oversight by the Board of Public Works, where if the initial outlay for that emergency contract is for over $1 million, they have to get approval from the Board of Public Works to proceed with that. If it's less than $1 million, then the department can go ahead and proceed with that. And the vast majority of these, I think, actually take more, as Mr. Powell kind of pointed out, probably about 70% of these contracts actually take longer than 2 days themselves to actually, be completed and go through. So most of these emergency procurements aren't taking place that quickly within even that 48-hour window initially.
Okay, so so I'm going to encourage other folks to add when it's additive, to quote my the chair, but if it's not, we can move on to the next questions because we have other senators with questions too. Madam Treasurer, Mr. Powell, are we good? Senator Lamb seemed like he did a good job on that one. Okay, moving on. My second question about MBE, and we certainly want to provide support and customers for our minorities, women, veterans, small businesses. Sometimes though, Mr. Powell, you said there might be only one entity, one business that can provide the service or the goods that we need. How do you balance that? And how can we look at that chart that you both posted showing the significantly lower MBE rate when we don't really have the data that for this one thing, for this one kind of helicopter, there really is only one provider or something? How can we make sense of that data? And I think I'm tossing that to Mr. Powell, since it was your.
Oh, sure. And I want to be clear. I'm here for informational purposes. I'm not a proponent or an opponent of the bill. I just want to be clear about that.
You're in as favorable, just so you know.
I'm sorry?
You're down as favorable, so that's helpful. I will correct that.
Please, thank you. So I think based on what we took a look at, that the greatest way to increase MBE content in these contracts, and I want to say this is not in the report, but I think back of the envelope, if these contracts had been done with the MBE participation of normal contracts, I think we're talking about $8 million a year in revenue to MBEs that wasn't realized. I think the greatest way to increase MBE, SBE, VSBE revenue would be to take contracts that end up being done as emergencies, but didn't need to be, and getting them to go through the normal procurement process. Because as you pointed out, Senator, when you only have a day or two in order to be able to buy the thing that you need, sometimes it's very difficult to incorporate the state's MBE goals into that contract.
Right. I think the aim is to, if it doesn't need to be an emergency procurement, to get it back into the normal process. And I think what Mr. Powell's data shows is that a lot of the ones that are shoved through as emergency procurements don't need to necessarily be emergency procurements.
Okay, thank you. Madam Treasurer, you've unmuted. Do you want to add something for us?
I agree with what was said, and I would like to reiterate the overwhelming number of emergency contracts, in fact, pandemic aside, in my impression, just from sitting on the Board of Public Works, is because we didn't do the appropriate maintenance and we didn't do the appropriate work before we caused an emergency. And then you have to go forward with emergency. And it seems to me that a lot of it is is retrospective examination and questioning of why we got to where we are. And that would also allow questioning into the issue of MBE. And it's true. I mean, they just sometimes just go for whoever is available.
Sure.
Happen to be the people they worked with before.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Last question, Senator Lamb, but also Mr. Powell, you referenced this. The report that goes to Governor, LPC, budget and tax, blah, blah, blah. I wonder what you think about including the Joint Audit Committee and or the Office of Legislative Audits, since those are our legislative oversight, sort of watchdogs.
I'd be happy to do that. I think the Joint Audit Committee is included in that, but I'm happy to include OLA too. I'll double check on that.
Yeah, it doesn't say it in the bill, so unless it's in the amendment and I missed it, yeah, we can talk about that offline, but maybe council could do that. Okay, thank you. We now have questions from Senator Carozza and Senator Ellis. Senator Carozza, you were up first.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And Senator Lamb, as you well know, I'm a process person, and that probably, for those who don't know, because I've served at both the in the executive and legislative branches of government at both the state and federal level, so try to really understand processes. You had mentioned in your, I believe your opening statement, that there was a work group that was assembled to put together this major reform, and I wanted to know the makeup of that work group.
And I don't remember referring to a work group, but I think, and I apologize if I did, there wasn't a work group. These recommendations were actually in Mr. Powell's report. So it was a report that, an examination done by I forgot what OPEGA stands for, Mr. Powell, but the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. I think I got that right.
That's correct.
So it was his personnel and staff that did the review, and those recommendations are what comprise this bill.
Okay, so that's why I asked my question. Then it's fair to say that there were, it did not include any, what I thought was a work group, but the bill did not, in the development of it, did not include members of the executive branch at the state level. Is that correct?
Sorry, Senator, I can,
go ahead.
From the perspective of having written the report. So one of the things we did, and thank you, Treasurer Kopp, is reach out to the 3 members of the BPW to get there. We asked a bunch of questions of them. 2 of them were kind enough to respond to us. All 3 of us, all 3 of them at least connected with us about that. So we did get input from at least 2 of the members of the BPW on their perspective. And then we also ran sort of our draft by the Department of General Services, the Office of State Procurement. It's a practice that I like to do to say, this is what we sort of initially see. Do you have any thoughts on this? So we talked to procurement people from a dozen departments around the state and talked to a number of other states. So I'm not sure if that directly answers your question, but we tried to be really thorough when we took a look at the issue.
Well, I understand that. And I guess we always try to strike the balance between oversight and overreach. And it just seemed to me with such major reform that it's, when you develop something that you involve, members of the executive branch, as opposed to running something by them after you have your proposal. So that's why I did ask the process question, because obviously this is major reform that will obviously impact the executive branch. And it really, at least from the response, doesn't appear like they were really involved on the front end of this. So thank you for that response.
Thank you, Senator Carozza. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kagan, and thank you for this bill, Senator Lamb. This bill is a little more, well, I introduced the Senate Bill 197, which went directly at the minority business enterprise participation in emergency procurement, which, from advocates and experience over the years, MBE, minority business enterprise firms, veteran firms, women's firms, small business are very underrepresented in this area. And so just trying to do the research and look at your bill and listen to the testimony, does your bill, the Senate Bill 829, address the MBE participation goals as far as mandating that emergency procurement be part of the MBE process?
So I think it's difficult to mandate the MBE and the other diversity requirements as part of the emergency procurement process. And I think that's, as Mr. Powell was alluding to, the best way to address it is to get emergency procurements that don't really need to be emergencies out of the emergency procurement column and back into the normal procurement column, where there's not the time crunch of having to, replace the boiler or et cetera, et cetera. And so the best way to do that is to ensure that those that don't need to be emergencies can go through another process where there is a good, at least a better process in place. I think you saw from Mr. Powell's chart, we're still not meeting I guess, many of the MBE type goals, but we're much closer to meeting those aspirational goals in the standard procurement process than we are in the emergency procurement process, where it's much lower. And I think to address Senator Croz's point, I mean, this is the normal process that we go through with OLA, where auditors go in, they work with the departments, and they come up with findings and recommendations. And so there is some give and take there. So I think, that is kind of reflected in Mr. Powell's process too.
Yeah, and so okay, well, let's deal with my question right now. So this is an important issue because, our society always game the system when it comes to dealing with minorities. Always with employment, we cannot find qualified Blacks. We cannot find qualified to employ. We can't find qualified. And so it's always this issue we can't find. And so the issue is this system is being gamed to be an emergency, like your report says, so that I believe, and a lot of participants in this field believe, that it's being gamed to the system where they can go to a sole source provider. And so as a state, we have, I know we have an obligation to move these procurements away from being gamed to say that emergency procurement, look at the MBE list of qualified suppliers also. Look at the list and include them in it. Because when it's an emergency, we're not going to deal with the MBE. We're not going to deal with women-owned firms. We're not going to deal with Black firms, veterans firms. And my constituents, again, very much annoyed with, and that's a light word to say, with the constant harping on, we cannot find qualified. And all these processes are used to really game the system. And so I would love us to be proactive and include minority business enterprise, veteran-owned businesses, women-owned businesses in all these contracts, so we cannot be gamed anymore. And so also in doing the research I know we have folks viewing this presentation, some of your slides indicated it was like Senate Bill 892, and there's a transcription error with this is Senate Bill 829. And so
829.
829. So we have to let folks know watching on the outside that, this is Senate Bill 829. And so I thank you for, your answer to this question. And I look forward to moving the MBE procurement onto the emergency procurement side also.
I share your concerns, and just briefly to touch on them, and that's why we actually included a provision in here to actually get more verbal bids. Because right now, when they do these emergency procurements, they just can take the first one and just go with it. So there's actually a provision in here to say you have to get at least 3 verbal bids to have reasonable attempts to get at least 3 verbal bids to at least increase that mix and the potential that you could get MBE contracts as part of this.
Yeah, and I'm going for a direct requirement that emergency procurement is included in MBE participation goals. Not just a indirect way of doing it. We have to be direct with these laws, and I really believe that we will work on that, and we'll push for that, for it to be directly part of the requirements
yeah, I'm happy to work with you on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to, before we complete the hearing on Senate Bill 829, I want to mention that Comptroller Francho submitted favorable with amendment testimony. Unfavorable testimony came from the Department of Transportation. Just so you know, the administration did step out on this one. Department of Transportation doesn't like this bill. The Department of General Services doesn't like this bill. The Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, as well as the Transportation Builders and Association and the Asphalt Association. So colleagues, you might want to take a look at their testimony as we look at this important legislation. With that, Senator Lamb, Mr. Powell, Treasurer Kopp, thank you again. That completes the hearing on Senate Bill 829. And at long last, we come to our final bill of the day. Senator Elfreth, when I'm last, I usually say saving the best for last. I don't know whether we'll decide that that's what this is or not, but we are always glad to have you in EHE. Senate Bill 925, Senator Elfreth, Work Group on Public Water Access. You will kick us off, followed by Jana Davis with Chesapeake Bay Trust, and then John Griffith with Chesapeake Conservancy, and Thornell Jones. Let me just indicate there is no opposition, and we have John Griffin, former secretary. It says Griffith as signed up, and it didn't say Griffin. It's so nice to see you.
Great to see you, Madam Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you. So we have a cybersecurity work group meeting following this that is going to be an hour and a half. Yep. So you will win some serious bonus points if you guys would be as speedy but comprehensive and substantive as possible. So with that, Senator Elfreth, you may begin.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Sarah Elfreth, representing Maryland's District 30. This is the last time I think I'm in front of you this year. It's bittersweet, my second favorite committee. But I'm here to present a bill that we all love our bills, but this one is personal, and this is near and dear to my heart. Senate Bill 925 would create a work group to study public water access. And I know we can get work group happy here in the General Assembly, but when they're at their best, they really do produce solid recommendations for us to make policy changes. And I think that's the goal. I know that's the goal here. So the basic premise of this work group is that we know we as a state, we are blessed to have so much shoreline, but across the state, and particularly even in my district, communities that were once open and public water access sites that were once open to the public are slowly but surely being privatized. Particularly in my district, we had former communities of color that have since been gentrified, and those water access sites have been cut off to the public. And we know when people have access to the Bay, they have a greater interest in wanting to protect the Bay. And I heard a quote in our actually a budget hearing yesterday that I thought was really relevant to this issue, which is Sir David Attenborough, a British naturalist, said that no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they've never experienced. And if I were to surmise this bill in one quote, that would be it. It's about ensuring that everybody have equitable access to the incredible treasure we have of the Chesapeake Bay. And just a couple statistics, we have a lovely preamble that we worked hard on to try to capture this issue, but we know that this is timely, this is urgent with the pandemic, that when we've measured park utilization, particularly in the middle of the pandemic, we've seen that folks are going to green spaces and public parks to an 86.97% greater degree than they had prior to the pandemic. We know that we have a tremendous amount of shoreline. We're blessed with that. We have 7,719 miles of shoreline, but only 629 public water access sites. We know that we have a lot of great parks that are locally owned, state owned, federally owned, but those are not always activated the way that we know that folks would like. They don't always have picnic tables. They don't always have fishing piers. They don't always have kayak launches. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can really address if we thoughtfully and strategically examine this issue. So what this bill does is it puts together a group of stakeholders. You'll see it's a pretty comprehensive list, and I would argue there's probably a couple more that we could add to it. And then it would request that this stakeholder group, this work group, really examine the sites that we currently own as a public, as I said, local, county, state, federal, to look for greater activation opportunities, that the work group will consider equitable access and transportation to these public water access sites, that we look at ways that we can incentivize via tax code, via policy, both at the local and state level, how to increase those public water access sites, to bring us back an interim report by next session so we can start this work, a final report the year after that. But this is truly near and dear to my district's heart and to my heart. I have a wonderful panel, Madam Chair, that can tell you why this is so important. I've been brought in a former secretary because he's spent his career working on this very issue. And it's not just an issue that's important to my community. There was a great report done in 2013 from the National Park Service that was watershed wide. But their feedback here in Maryland is that we really have a great demand, particularly in Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, and along the Eastern Shore. There's a lot more we can do, but we really don't have a plan. We don't have a vision, and this work group will ensure that and ensure that every Marylander has an equitable access to their Chesapeake Bay. So with that, Madam Chair, I urge a favorable report. Thank you very much.
Senator Elfreth, as you may know or may not know, EHE is the committee of puns, and you're talking about public water access, and you were talking about insuring. I don't know if you did that on purpose, but that's what I heard. All right. So to your great panel, Jana Davis, Chesapeake Bay Trust, please kick us off. You have up to 5 minutes. But
great, thank you so much. I will not take that much time. And I wish I could come up with a good pun on the fly. Usually I love puns. I'll see if I can work one in later. But Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, I'm Jana Davis, Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Trust. The trust role in this bill is to administer the work group and oversee its body of work. Many of you know the trust. We're a nonprofit that you all created in the 1980s as a complement to larger agencies like DNR and MDE. We administer funds from the Bay Plate, which is pretty recognizable. You all know the tax checkoff, Chesapeake and Endangered Species, and a bunch of other partnerships, federal and state and local partnerships who want to send their money through the trust. The reason the trust is called upon in the bill is that our mission really is to engage people. Senator Elfreth said it best, for natural resources to be improved, people have to be engaged. For people to be engaged, they have to know it and they have to love it. And for that love to develop, they have to be able to see it and touch it. And so we really have to figure out how to get more people accessing resources. This isn't just, of course, about our mission, which is improving natural resources. It's also about the fact that natural resources, of course, improve people. Also, this is really a health issue. I think we're all thinking about this now with COVID. The more time we spend outdoors, the more our blood chemistry improves, heart health, mental health, all these health-related things. There's actually doctors that are now prescribing people time outside in parks. And I think with COVID, we're starting to see that there's an equity issue. I mean, we've known that there's an equity issue with access, but there's an equity piece with access and health connected. If you start out not very healthy, you can't fend off things like COVID very well. And if you don't have access to really healthy outdoor places, you're just naturally going to be less healthy. So we really need to make sure that there is that access. And getting a handle on the problem through this work would be the first step. There's an economic piece too. Healthier people have lower societal costs, missed days of work, insurance, all that. Interestingly, in January, we hosted a legislative reception that many of you attended. We really appreciate that. And the theme was, you all gave us your favorite outdoor places to go visit. And we were amazed. 60 legislators participated. You all gave us these amazing ideas. We had no idea that many people would want to stay on. You were on for 10 minutes longer than the thing was supposed to go. And then later, you all wanted to know what everyone else had said. So we put this report together that we weren't planning on doing. So obviously access is a thing. Getting access to the outdoors is very important. You all recognize it. You shared your spots. You all offered to take each other fishing and on tours. It was super cool. We're honored to be a part of this, happy to play a role, and I'm happy to answer questions about our role in this bill as well as the trust. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Davis. It sounds like you are looking to make waves with your advocacy. All right, come on, it's not that hard. Okay.
I wish I'd thought of it.
And I want to know whether we can take our Zooms outside in the sun to get our vitamin D and good mental health. But I think that's unlikely. Secretary Griffin, please welcome Chesapeake Conservancy. Nice to have you here.
Great to be here. Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Nice to see some old friends. You're not old, I am. But I'm actually representing the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership, not to belabor this. It was set up in response to President Obama's executive order on the Bay, and it's now about an 80+ member landscape collaborative for the Bay watershed all the levels of agencies from federal to local involved in conserving and at times restoring lands. Lots of nonprofits, particularly land trusts for the whole Bay watershed. We, under the current Chesapeake Bay Agreement, quickly have two goals that we're supposed to meet. One is to conserve permanently another 2 million acres of land by 2025, which is the TMDL deadline. And we're about 70% of the way there. Last calculation was done a few years ago. The second was to bring on, apropos Senator Elfreth's, my senator's legislation, 300 new or expanded water access sites, primarily funded with a match from the National Park Service, who administers the Chesapeake Gateways program. That's one of the major, but not the only sources of funding. And we're about 65% of the way there by 2025. So having been involved in this for years, in a variety of ways, I think we've made some reasonable progress, but we have a lot more to do. And what was most exciting to me about Senator Elfreth's bill is that it really will create the ingredients that can be patched together in an overall master plan of potential sites that can be expanded. So that's exciting. And in terms of economic benefits, in addition to those that the Senator and Jana Davis mentioned, the Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2019 did a report for each state on the value of outdoor recreation, and they found in Maryland, $7 billion was annually spent on outdoor recreation, most of it in boating and fishing. And there were 90,000 jobs created with a $4 billion payroll. So we need to remember the important value that outdoor recreation generally, and specifically water access, particularly in this state, has on our economy and on job growth. You know, there's some impediments I want to, or challenges that we have that were recognized, I think, by the Senator's bill. The one I'd like to spend just a moment on is, the issue of addressing the access and health. Pardon me, mine.
Sorry, your 2.5 minutes just ran out.
Okay, not a problem.
Like do 1 or 2 sentences just as a courtesy, but please wrap up.
We need to really focus on creating, wherever we can, green connections to water access for disadvantaged communities of color. It's a critical issue.
Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Secretary Griffin. I think he's going to be fishing for compliments for his testimony. That's what I'm thinking. Senator Elfreth, aren't you glad this is your last time here? You don't have to.
I'm just mad at myself. I hadn't come with funds, but next
May not be our last time.
Cornell Jones, welcome. I saw you were here earlier, but I missed what organization or if you were here as an individual, but welcome, and you have up to 2.5 minutes as well.
Madam Chair, I did have my hand up and I put my
Okay, so Senator Patterson, we have one more witness and then we're taking questions. If it's okay, can we wait?
Oh, okay. I thought you were wrapping up. Okay.
No, Mr. Jones is about to give his testimony. He has up to 2.5 minutes.
All right.
Thank you, Madam
Don't cut out
Chair.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak about this subject that's captured my attention over the 30 years I've lived in Maryland. I've been a member of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary all that time and enjoy the water, something I never had an opportunity to do before I came to Annapolis. Directly and indirectly, because of my membership in the Coast Guard Auxiliary, I spent hundreds of hours annually on the rivers and creeks of the Middle Chesapeake and Upper Bay, and even did a circumnavigation of the Delmarva Peninsula. My observation is that there's little land from which non-property owners can enjoy the wonderful waters. In fact, there are not enough launch ramps for all the small boats that families use to enjoy the water. Even the smallest boats, canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddle boards have difficulty finding places to launch. I'm also a hiker and birder. Although there are some parks for such activity, I found that during this pandemic, they've been crowded by people seeking a place of respite from the stress of isolation. These parks having been discovered, it's expected that more people will frequent them and it will become more difficult to find enough space for all who seek respite, especially near the shore. Sandy Point State Park is a prime example of the lack of shoreline space for all who seek it. The line to get into the park on weekend days are extremely long, and many families are turned away, and this long before the pandemic. All citizens should be able to enjoy the outdoors, have ready access to the shoreline and the waters, and it should be available to all, not just owned by individuals. This problem is now solidified, but through public trust, either by donation or public purchase, access to parks and the water could be increased such that an afternoon in the park or on the water is not a stress-producing activity. That should be a stress-reducing activity in a state with as much water and physically friendly shoreline as Maryland. I'm asking that the committee recognize that part of the problem I have described is strictly due to inequity and exacerbates the fact that there are other inequities in our state. To overcome this inequity, this bill addresses the lack of awareness of the depth of the problem as well as the breadth of its impact. It gets down to collecting the data in an equitable fashion so the legislation can, in the near future, address solutions that develop to overcome this negative aspect of the way we've used the state's shoreline resources. I ask the committee to move this bill forward, pass it to the General Assembly for passage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm discerning that your testimony is that you think anyone who opposes this bill is, Senator Alfred, you got it? All wet. Okay. None of this is advanced planned. It's just, it's natural. What can I do? It's a disease. For the record, written testimony favorable from Susan Zellers, Marine Trades Association of Maryland. Also, the Chesapeake Conservancy, Reed Perry, favorable with amendment from Chesapeake Conservancy, Nature Conservancy, and Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So there were a couple of quick questions. Again, let me emphasize this is our last bill hearing, and we have an hour and a half with cybersecurity work group. So I know, right? Okay, and Senator Hester will make that official announcement in a bit as soon as we're wrapping. So Senator Carozza and then Senator Patterson, it sounded like you had a question. I see no hands raised in the room, but Senator Carozza, briefly, go for it.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. It looks like your witnesses were fishing for compliments, and I do want to throw them a line.
I already used that. Oh, but fishing. Okay, there you go. The second half.
Okay. I teed off of it. Okay.
Nice.
Anyway, Senator Elfreth, as you know, public water access is very important to my district, and so was interested in looking at the makeup of the work group and wanted to ask if you would be open to amending to include a member of the Rural Maryland Council. It did not look like they were included in this, and they are interested in being part of it.
Absolutely. I think I'm surprised that there's someone we left off because it's such a long list. But of course, I think making sure we try to make it as representative of the state as possible. But yes, that would be a great addition.
You're good, Senator Carozza? Excellent. Thank you for your question. Senator Patterson, wrap us up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Senator Elfreth, for this very fine bill. I just wanted to chime in and say hello to Mr. Griffin. I got to know him many years ago when he was at WSSC, and here we are end up together at the state level. So it's good to see you, and stay
Thank
safe.
you, Senator Patterson. Good to see you too.
All
Sorry, it's virtual and not.
That's all right.
So,
Chair, thank you.
So I think this was a very strong hearing because all of the witnesses pooled their testimony. Okay, that completes the hearing on Senate Bill 925, and I am very glad to have made former Secretary Griffin laugh so much. With that completes that bill hearing. Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you, Senator Elfreth, once again for your leadership on this bill and so many others this session. If this is the last time we'll see you here. And that will complete EHE's hearings for the day. I want to announce first, the colleagues know this, but anyone watching online, we will be voting tomorrow morning as a committee in person between 9:45 and 11:45 a.m. in the committee hearing room. It will be streamed online. So the chairman asked me to remind everybody of that. Senator Hester, please announce about the cybersecurity work group.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Our cybersecurity work group will be convening at 5:30. I expect it will be about 90 minutes, so we'll have a hard stop at 7. So grab, I can't think of a good pun. Grab some snacks and we'll see you online at 5:30.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all for your engagement, and this hearing is adjourned.